Toolbox for responsible sourcing. As previously mentioned, everything is being recorded and also is being streamed live to YouTube as well. So if you get fed up of watching this on Zoom, feel free to pop across to YouTube and you will see everything there. With regards to our fantastic speakers, you will see them all lined up as panelists with us. And so some of them are going to come and go through the course of the afternoon. Hopefully as many of them as possible are going to stick around for the end panel, where we will be able to have some discussion as to some of those light bulb moments that we might be having through the course of this particular session. For the lovely attendees, we welcome as much discussion and interaction as possible. Our sincere apologies for not having you on video or with your microphones on. And we are, of course, using the Zoom webinar function, which allows you to interact with us either via the chat, but also through the Q&A as well. So please do feel free to ask us as many questions as you would like, and our fabulous panelists will be able to address them as and when they go. Also, when we are going through the presentations, the vast majority of the speakers today, they've been given a 10-minute speaking slot followed by a 10-minute question slot. Okay, so there's 20 minutes in total per speaker. So far, we've been pretty good at sticking to time, there or thereabouts. I'm looking at Rose. She's the person in charge. Have we been okay, Rose? She's giving me a nod. Excellent. So we're passing at the moment. It's really important for us to stick to time, because it means if people are dipping in and out of the conference, they know exactly who and what to expect at what time. So speakers, if you do run over your 10 minutes, that is fine, but it just means that you're cutting into your question and answer time. What does that then mean? It means that if our fabulous attendees have been asking us lots of lovely questions, then we will be inviting our speakers to answer those questions either via the chat or via the Q&A. If you are watching us via YouTube rather than via Zoom, you can also ask us questions in the chat function within YouTube. We're also keeping an eye on Twitter, LinkedIn, and any other social media platform that we might be listed on at the moment, but those are the main ones at the moment. Also, it has been known for people to email us with questions, or if you happen to have our phone numbers, questions have come in via WhatsApp, etc. in the past. That is perfectly okay, and we will do our best to try and bring all of those questions and that dialogue into the central table. So what have we heard over the last few days? Well, this time yesterday, we had a fantastic opening to our conference where we heard from 3 brilliant experts. What does the E, the S and the G mean in environment, social and governance? So we had talks from the WWF, we had talks from Susan Joyce and then Ludovine Wouters, really giving us that fabulous introduction. We then heard about perspectives that might be perceived or might come from, say, mining companies, from governments, from banking, from insurance, and then from society as a whole, or from the world of communication. So all of that allowed us to really step outside perhaps our normal worlds or bubbles that perhaps we inhabit, and take a look at what does ESG within raw materials truly mean. So that's what set the conference up, and we finished with a really great discussion helped along by the founder of the Young Mining Professionals, so with regards to Cat Bell, and so that helped us really consolidate some of those learnings yesterday. All of the information from that can of course already be found online, because Rose and the team have been that efficient in terms of being able to post things up there immediately after the end of that session. Now, this morning, and I know for some of you, it is still very much early morning, so welcome to all of you who are dialing in from the Pacific coast of the Americas. But earlier on, so in the middle of your night, we had the second session, and during that session, we really managed to take a proper look at some of the different perspectives of mining. So we opened up this morning's session with Hugo Brody from the London Metals Exchange, and so he talked about a lot of the changes that they've been making over the past year, in fact over a number of years now, to say, okay, how does the exchange really ensure that ESG is a component part that allows people to actually sell and trade metals within that particular forum? We then heard from the likes of Victor Carrera, who looked at different types of power within the broader global sense of trade. And then into Ruth Allington, who helped us look at how do you mediate disputes or really begin to have that empathy for people who maybe perceive minerals and mining, etc., and raw materials from different perspectives. We then had Andy Whitmore from the London Mining Network, and Andy was brilliant. He managed to consolidate a 70-page report into 10 minutes of beautiful speech and slides. So it's well worth going and catching up with his update there as well. And Andy was followed up by Professor Murray Hitzman, who gave us a whistle-stop tour, a case study of the Lachine mine. So one of the fabulous mines that only fairly recently closed actually in Ireland. So a really, really good geological type talk from Murray there. Then we had John Russell, who provided us with a synthesis, shall we say, of the decision-making flowchart that was an output from the InFact project. The InFact project was one of the big European-funded research projects that really looked at, okay, how do we make sure that exploration, especially within mining, is done in a responsible way? And so that linked across to a huge amount of work that was done across Europe over the last few years. And I know we're going to be hearing from John later on this afternoon in a slightly different capacity, so we look forward to that. We then heard from the wonderful Rowan Thorne, who took us on a bit of a field trip to Liberia, and especially he, as a geologist, gave us insight as to how does he interact with the communities when he's out and about in the field. And I think a really big takeaway from that was that whilst he's there for geological purposes, actually he spends the majority of his time with the local community, building that understanding, that trust and that respect in all directions with regards to that. And that's something that Nick Copeland is going to pick up on in a little bit when we go to his talk in a matter of minutes, Nick. So we're almost with you now. We finally finished off with a talk from Ruth Apps from the company Gravicity, and apologies, I've managed to butcher that name, but basically this is an amazing mechanical form of battery where you effectively utilize things like old mine shafts and you effectively lower and raise weights within that shaft, and that lowering and raising is of course the mechanism through which you store energy. The chat went crazy during that, with people offering ideas for different shafts, different ideas and how their particular technology could be utilized. So this was brilliant. This was really thinking outside of the box and saying, okay, how do we actually generate energy, and also how can we make use of some of our old mine workings as well? So there was some really lovely stuff coming through there. And then finally, we finished off with our panel session where we were joined by Marit, who is an absolutely phenomenal teacher. She's currently based in Switzerland, and Marit is in the process of putting together some training materials more for universities, where people can do things like role play, etc., and truly begin to understand what are the different perspectives and requirements, etc., from different stakeholders who may be involved in the raw materials space. So it's been a busy conference so far, and we're not even halfway there. In fact, we're miles away from being halfway there. There's a whole load of exciting stuff to come. And this afternoon, we're going to actually start off. We've managed to sneak in a little session with Nick Copeland. And Nick, I'm going to actually invite you just to get ready to share those slides in a second, because I'm going to let you go for your talk, and then I'll interject with questions as and when appropriate. We've got a fantastic lineup for you guys this afternoon. Please do feel free to stick with us all the way through, or dip in and out depending on what fits with your diaries and of course your life at your end of this Zoom call or this YouTube video. Everything is being recorded, so feel free to catch up with it later. If you've got any ideas, suggestions, please do get in contact with us at hello@responsiblerawmaterials.com. Two final messages, Nick, before I come to you. The first one is that we've got a number of training sessions that we're running next week, and we're very fortunate to have had them sponsored. So we have a number of free places on those training courses. If you are interested in signing up for a training course, there are details about those training courses on the website, but also please feel free to email Ellen. Ellen, give us a wave. She's typing in her email address into chat at the moment. So that will be ellen@satala.com, and Ellen will be able to sort you out, or just get in contact with Rose at hello@Responsible Raw Materials, and she will also be able to sort you out with a free spot on those training courses. And finally, we are running a competition this week. Last year, we asked everybody to draw a picture of a mine. Okay, and there were special prizes for if you managed to get your children or perhaps even your grandparents involved. What did they perceive a mine to look like? This year, we've evolved this slightly, and this year we're asking you to draw a picture of a responsible mine. So what does a responsible mine look like? It might look exactly the same, or it might look fairly different. So if you've got your ideas for what those pictures should look like, there will be no judgment as to the quality of drawing. It's all about seeing past that and to the ideas that sit beneath. If you've got your drawing, if you want to send that into hello@Responsible Raw Materials, and we will be able to consolidate them and share them at the end of the week. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome to our virtual stage the fantastic Nick Copeland. Now, Nick and I, we only met probably just a few days ago properly. And actually, Nick has got some fantastic stories that he would like to tell and share that really fitted in well to the conference, which is why we've managed to sneak him in to this beginning slot for you this afternoon. Nick, I'll invite you to introduce yourself and then take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm Nick Copeland, and 4 years ago, I set up Above Ground Risk Solutions, having worked for more than a decade in places like Pakistan, Indonesia, and seeing the sharp end of some of the impacts of mining from Papua to the Pakistan-Afghan border. And I really wanted to see if the risk and security side of the house could assist more the sustainability and great teams in community relations. And so we've been working over the years to try and bridge the gap. And in the last year, we've been doing that very much so in places like Suriname and Peru. Peru has been more focused on the COVID pandemic and trying to help executives navigate their way through that. But in Suriname, we actually were on the ground in the jungle right into March 2020. And the crisis actually allowed us to really unpack our findings and create a report that was probably a little more in depth than anticipated. But it also meant that we looked at the social side of small-scale mining in that country. And I felt there were some interesting stories that came out. And so we wanted to share some of those, as I think there are some crossovers into the whole ESG discussion, and also for those who haven't been out on the ground in the last year, remind us all of some of the really challenging problems that are there and do need solutions. And therefore, the policy, the frameworks around ESG always need to get back down to the ground and allow the site teams to also be part of the not just a problem at times. And there in Suriname, there's a large goal, and they have problems. One of them is pit intruders. And what's interesting is that I am part of the security side of the house, but I do understand that in that picture on the right, there are two problems there. One is a trespasser who has come in due to poverty to search for gold-bearing materials, probably to feed his family or to get a better life. And the other is a military officer who is armed. They're both problems because the human rights breaches that could occur by that interaction are severe and have already caused fatalities at this site, which then led into a whole sequence of events of a destruction temporarily of the social license, a invasion of the industrial zone, a cost of $45 million to the company, a reduction in their share price. But it all started with an interaction that was badly handled but between those two individuals on the right. And so that's when it gets to the human level. The poverty of the person on the left and the response of the person on the right. And it's not just that interaction. These people take huge risks in their own personal safety by climbing into these pits, getting down ramps that are 20 meters vertical, interacting with mine trucks, and then even worse, they can hide out and be exposed to blast. So we really wanted to unpack this problem that was causing over 100 intruders per night and operational issues, as well as all these human and social problems, so that we could help the mine get beyond this and be able to create a more coexistence model. So what we did was, first of all, we tried.
I think we may have lost Nick in terms of the of his video at the moment. Rose, I don't know if you're getting a better connection than me.
No, I can't. It's frozen.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what you can see here, I suspect, is Nick is describing a problem or a risk that is faced by many mining companies around the world, where we have that interaction between the large scale mining and then artisanal mining or smaller scale mining that's often going on in the same place. And I know from personal experience, I've been actually very, very privileged to go and work in a number of parts of the world where this has been one of the challenges perhaps that needs to be addressed. Nick, sorry, we lost you there for a little bit. So apologies for that. You're about to take us into the five forces, etc. But I just wonder, with regards to that, so you went through a number of different tools and techniques to really understand that incredibly complicated situation that was developing on the ground. And I know that you've developed a number of tools as an output to help address some of that. Do you want to quickly just verbally take us through some of those?
Yeah, definitely. The key was to unpack the problem and actually work with all the different departments, including legal and corporate relations, to understand the root causes. Because without that, trying to apply risk mitigation solutions was only going to be treating symptoms, not cause. And we unpacked that for them. We took them through in workshops some of the paternalistic top-down approach that they had been taking, but wasn't really a bottom-up one. They were paying as they go, and that is always costly in the longer term. Yeah. We also unpacked this issue that they were classing all miners as illegal, whereas in fact it's fascinatingly more discreet and nuanced. So we showed them that there was, yes, a sector of the demographic that was illegal, but many were actually rights-based under traditional authority and the legal laws of the land. And so we then showed them the tools around how we can oppose this by doing 4 forces for good, for positive effect. And we engaged with the miners. Here was me with some of the small scale mining leaders, and we talked to them and we listened to their issues. And then from there, we actually created a standard, a document which is now in for agreement, that helps an integrated approach between the different departments to show who should be in the lead, at what point, and can we look for a coexistence model rather than this tension and combative model.
So with that as well, then, Nick, sorry, I'll let you go on for your tracker and then I'll pull you out.
Sure. And so we have then seen that records of engagement, promises made, and location identification of the small scale miners was also, very rudimentary. So we've created an online platform for them called SSM Tracker that helps them actually define who, when, what, and how they can actually record the information from all different departments and take a step-by-step process to look at resolution and a better relationship with these miners in the jungle.
Fantastic.
And it's been quite the journey.
That's brilliant, Nick. And I think I know that time is really short, and so my sincere apologies for that. But what I would recommend is, I'm sure Nick will be happy to put his email address into chat so you can see more about this tracker. Now, the reason why we were really keen to bring Nick in on the conversation for this conference is that last year we had a number of absolutely fantastic talks on artisanal and small scale mining. And it is often it is very different to what we perceive it might look like. And they are very complicated social based issues that are going on behind the scenes that really take a lot of digging to truly understand, and certainly a lot of empathy to understand what is happening there. So Nick, if you're happy to share either your website or your email address, I'm sure that many people will be really interested in what you've got. And also, if you're able to stick around for the panel session at the end, that would be absolutely fantastic. So I realise, ladies and gents, that was very short and sweet with regards to the fantastic Nick. But as you can see, some awesome stories there. Nick, thank you very much. A massive round of applause for yourself from all of us from behind our muted microphones. And I'm going to move swiftly across to the world of Ben Lepley, who may or may not have his guitar at this precise second in time. He does. And Lucy Crane, who may have her guitar. I don't know. Lucy's thinking, oh my goodness me. No. Excellent. So Ben and Lucy, I'm going to pass straight across to yourselves and get you guys to introduce yourselves as well. Ben and Lucy are going to be talking about perceptions of mining and some tools and tips that we can do to use to address some of that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks for having us here today. All of the talks that I've managed to listen into so far have just been absolutely fantastic, and it's great to have so much variety. So yeah, we're very honoured to be included in the list of speakers today. So Ben and I are talking to you today as co-chairs of the Public Perception Committee about mining through the Critical Minerals Association. So I won't talk too much about the CMA. I believe on Friday morning, Jeff and Kirsty, who are the founders of the Critical Minerals Association, will be talking to you in much more detail about the work that they're doing. But in a nutshell, it was formed just over about 12 months ago, involves people from the domestic mining industry in the UK, as well as people who are headquartered in the UK, but working internationally. And it's doing great things to get mining onto, the government's agenda. Critical raw materials are going to play such a huge part in this energy transition. And so they're doing a really good job at actually making sure that the government are thinking about how to source them responsibly. Ben and I co-chair the Public Perception Committee, and in the last 12 months, we've actually been doing quite a lot of work. We'll talk to you about there's some amazing resources out there. So we've been trying to pool all of them together. We've been trying to have conversations with people associated with the mining industry, but not directly. And we're really keen to encourage as many young people as possible to study STEM subjects and to actually consider going into the mining industry as an interesting place for their career. A lot of our members are doing fantastic things around the perception of mining and stakeholder engagement things around our own specific projects. Cornish Lithium, where I work, we're doing work in Cornwall, for example, around our projects down here. But the CMA is really an opportunity for us to pool all of this enthusiasm and resource from our membership base to try and go and spread this message a bit wider. It's great that we're kind of preaching to the choir here. We all believe that the mining industry is necessary, and we're all vested. We've all got a vested interest in doing it as responsibly as possible, which is fantastic. But we need to have those conversations with the wider public, and we're trying to find ways to do that. So I'm going to hand over to Ben now to talk about some of the specific work that we've been doing so far. But we would love for people who are listening to this to actually get involved with us. If you've got any ideas for what we can do, let's chat afterwards. So Ben, over to you.
Super, thanks, Lucy. And yeah, on the screen you can see here some groups of people, stakeholders that we have classified, and these are the groups that we've kind of targeted as part of the CMA public perception group. So to start with, we'll have a little look at young people. And yeah, young people have proven that they are very willing to fight for their future and demanding change. We as the minerals industry need to follow their lead really, and help to empower them through knowledge to ensure that they will make, you know, well-informed decisions. So taking from Professor Stewart's talk yesterday, swoon, we had to turn knowledge-driven education into problem-driven participation. That really stuck to me yesterday. So the big problem with young people is the connection, and so here's some good examples that we've pulled together, and they're by other companies that have made them, and we're just trying to pull them together. And on the CMA website is a specific place that we've put all these. So first of all, looking at the getting geoscience into education and into schools, into home education is difficult, but there are many different companies and initiatives out there. Things such as the EU-funded briefcase game, which actually has physical briefcases and also an online game that you can do with school-age kids. Time for Geography is a organization which creates video content for schools using academics and industry participants. The GeoBus is a physical bus, one in London, one in Scotland at the moment, who are going out to schools and actually providing multidisciplinary kind of workshops for school kids. And then obviously STEM as well, and there's so many different initiatives that STEM have. Minecraft. I mean, everyone loves video games, particularly young people. So Minecraft is a game about mining. So why aren't we using it more? It just doesn't, for me, it's just so obvious. And the BGS, the British Geological Survey, and the SGU, the Swedish Geological Survey, have both created mods and add-ins to the game to actually make it more geological and have more of a real context to the Minecraft world. So have a look at those if you haven't seen them. Charities working specifically to improve diversity and inclusion by targeting kids in deprived areas, such as two here, the Blair Project and the Social Mobility Foundation, who the CMA have both been in touch with, are providing opportunities, and we can interact with those guys to get our message out to these areas that otherwise we wouldn't maybe otherwise. Now, social media and apps, you know, that's a real tough nut to crack for industry. You know, LinkedIn is obviously the preferred method of choice for professionals, but young people don't use it. So using things such as YouTube, Twitter is difficult, but our friend Mystery Doug here, for example, on YouTube, you know, really tries to boil down very complex things into short, snappy videos. And you've got to make it short and sharp, bish, bash, bosh, to get your message across. And then artwork as well. Many young people use art to express themselves. So this could be a way to get to a group of people who otherwise we wouldn't reach. So I'll hand over to Lucy for the general public.
Thank you, Ben. And hopefully my internet is stable enough for you to all hear me. Okay. Are you able to click through onto the general public bit?
Yep, we're there.
Okay, I can't see it. Oh, there we go. Right, so the general public, how on earth do we reach people outside of this bubble of engaged and enthusiastic people who are involved in the mining industry? Because we've almost got our own echo chamber. And there are ways to do that, and we're starting to really look into this through the CMA. So projects such as the Eden project, for example, are fantastic. It's one of the biggest tourist destinations in the Southwest, if not the biggest, and it's in an old China clay pit, and it makes the most of its heritage. Museums are a fantastic way to reach, you know, whole swathes of society. I think I read somewhere once that actually engaging with primary school age children is one of the best ways to educate adults, because children will go home and talk to their parents about what they've learned at school that day. And it's a fantastic way to reach people. So museums, where you've got exhibitions dedicated to critical raw materials or the energy transition, they can be a brilliant way to reach whole swathes of society. And I think there's a real opportunity here for us to engage proactively with some of these museums. The Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, they're already doing brilliant things to do with the energy transition and the roles that minerals have to play in that. Locally, we've got the National Museum of Wales, we've got the Royal Cornwall Museum. All of them are interested in doing things, but that's something that I think we can champion as a community and actually go out and see if we can facilitate some of these exhibitions happening. And then you've got online events such as this, such as, you know, ones that can mining make the world a greener place. We just need to advertise them to people who aren't necessarily within our echo chamber. And then finally, on this point, because I'm very short of time, the Technology Metals for a Green Future project. This is a massive open online course that's been spearheaded by the University of Exeter, and they've had a fantastic take-up of this. There are so many resources out there to enable education about critical raw materials and why they're so important. We're trying to bring them all together and just raise visibility of them. And then finally, sorry, I said it was the last one, but I meant the second to last. There's also social media, and I know we've spoken about that before. There's national press, but doing things such as talks on YouTube or TED Talks, or trying to get involved in reports that your local news media might be doing about UK-based projects or about the impacts of what we're consuming has on our daily lives. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do this around the energy transition. So it's one way that we can maybe get in touch with audiences that wouldn't necessarily turn up to a mining conference about responsible sourcing. So Ben, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. And so the next category then, steaming through, is government. Quite a big one there, and they clearly have a major role to play in how the mineral industry operates in the UK and internationally. And the CMA has made, you know, big strides in this area by creating connections between the mineral supply chain companies and government, and linking with all the parliamentary party group on critical minerals. And through this, we've had a direct voice to MPs and institutions who make decisions. And the CMA, through Satala, through Sarah and team, ran a Mining 101 course to MP researchers that hopefully will become a permanent fixture in government and with other institutions. And we have a big opportunity here this year in the UK with COP26 and G7, where we can interact on a more international basis as well. So then moving on to the industry peers, Lucy.
Yeah, so we're not the only group trying to improve this public perception of the mining industry. Of course we're not. The IOM3 are doing fantastic work. The JOLSOC are doing fantastic work. Young mining professionals, I know Kat was on the panel last night, Women in Mining, all of these groups are kind of separately trying to, you know, fight against this negative public perception of the mining industry that we know is out there. I haven't got too much time to go into more detail on it now, but potentially we can ask about it in questions in a moment. But there are fantastic initiatives out there. We're not trying to replace that. We just want to make sure that we're complementing it, supporting other initiatives, and just really trying to get everybody's voice heard.
Absolutely. And another category that, you know, I think the mining industry has been, the minerals industry has been particularly challenged with is connecting with NGO, given that it's often an abrasive discussion between the two parties, but they're absolutely critical in terms of providing voice to stakeholders who otherwise would struggle to be heard, you know, be it local communities, indigenous peoples, artisanal small-scale miners, even the flora and fauna. They don't have a voice, so NGOs are there to really help out. So we need to, as we have through this conference, you know, had WWF and the London Mining Network, which is fantastic to get these organizations in at the same table for discussions and to actually have that debate rather than just, you know, mudslinging on social media or anything like that. You know, we need to have proper discussions about both sides of the coin. So lastly, then, we just wanted to pull out a few things that we found in terms of communication then. There's a few things we've observed, you know, putting the head above the parapet as one that's come up quite frequently of, you know, mining companies particularly. You know, there's obviously been a lot of failures big scale failures recently we all know about, but there's also been a lot of successes, and I think it gets drowned out often, and maybe rightly so as well. But if we don't put the head above the parapet and talk about some of the successes as well as the failures, and listen to what stakeholders are telling us back, then we're not going to go forward. So having that transparent conversation is key. On the other side of the argument then is, we don't want to be seen as just lecturing, and definitely not greenwashing. We need to talk about the elephants in the room. We need to talk about the negative incidents, discuss what's happened, and then work a way forward. So we want to try and avoid those things. So lastly from me then, this actually comes from the Geologize Practical Geocommunications course run by Dr. Hayden Mort, which I recommend to anyone out there. But this really stuck with me, that the two ways that scientists and the public look at presentations. So from our perspective, maybe as scientists, we love to pile on the detail, do big introductions, and then we kind of think about the conclusions right at the end. Whereas the public, if you want to have an engaging communication with the public, you've got to hook them. Why is it relevant to them? You've got to use emotion to get them engaged, and then leave the important details to afterwards. But the point is getting that hook in, which I just love. And I'll leave it to Lucy then to wrap up.
Thanks, Ben. So this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we've been trying to do with the CMA over the past year. And, you can see that there are some fantastic resources out there that the mining industry and various people have created. What we now need to do is work out how on earth do we get audiences to see them. It's impossible to get mining into the curriculum, but it can align with chemistry lessons. There are aspects that can align with geography lessons or biology lessons. Let's get that, see if we can get that in. Let teachers know what resources are out there. But equally, if anybody listening to this has got ideas as to how we can reach those audiences with these fantastic resources that are out there, and the enthusiasm of everybody who attends a conference like this, how can we harness that and actually start to have these conversations about how critical mining is, but how critical it is that we do it as responsibly as possible, because we're going to have to do a hell of a lot of it over the next few decades if we want to facilitate this energy transition. So thanks very much for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I realise we talked for quite a long time, but we can talk for hours more if you like. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy and Ben. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together from behind your muted microphones for the fabulous Lucy and Ben. And I have to say, I think the variety of material that you've managed to pull together just over the last short while, really, because the Critical Minerals Association has only been going, just over a year? And what's been achieved through those different working groups is really exciting. Now, there are a number of comments coming in through chat and the Q&A, etc. as well. And I think I'm going to go with a comment or a question that's come in from Erin Hood. And Erin asks, what advice would you give young geoscientists, for example, undergraduates, who are trying to promote sustainable mining?
Oh, that's Lucy's topic right there.
It's a really good question. No, it's a really good question. And, I think that's something that actually, as young geoscientists, you've got a real opportunity to talk to even younger potential geoscientists. By the time that people have chosen what they want to study at university, or if they want to go to university, it's almost too late. Obviously, it's not too late, but actually we need to be encouraging more students, a more diverse range of students as well, to study STEM subjects. We need more girls to do STEM subjects, and we need more people from diverse backgrounds to do them as well, and consider mining as a possible career. So one potential step that you could do is going back into your old schools, for example, giving a talk about what you're doing and the whole variety of stuff that you learn as a geoscience student, and just start the conversation about, is that whole, if something hasn't been grown, then it's been mined. And it does all boil down to that. And just so many people don't necessarily realize that. And then you can start to open up those conversations about, a lot of young people today are very keen and interested, it seems, in having careers that will, they feel like they're doing something good. They're not going to contribute to climate change. They don't want to work for an oil and gas company. But actually, there are many positive things that if they did want to become a geoscience, that they can really promote in a sustainable way through the tools that they develop as a geoscientist in training. So look at groups like Women in Mining, look at groups like Young Mining Professionals, join them, because they've got great routes and mechanisms for you to be able to go back into old schools and do talks, and can provide slides and things for you, and the Critical Minerals Association as well. But yeah, just by turning up to things like this, you're educating yourself and becoming involved in that conversation as well. So it's a huge start.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Lucy. Ben, have you got anything to add?
Well, just that universities are having to change their way in terms of the courses they're making, given the decline in student numbers, and they are rebranding. And I know the University of Derby, for example, have almost shut down their geology kind of degrees and then rebranded it and rebooted it, and with a real focus on sustainability and how it can actually, you need some of the geoscience background, but then really putting sustainability front and focus, and changing the emphasis.
Fantastic. And just actually building on that, Ben, so you mentioned sort of rebranding, or maybe also not rethinking, but evolving the way that that perhaps some of the education, etc., happens. And there's a question here from John Clark, and it's more of a comment in a way, saying that actually, how do we move from the university setting to an internet setting? So using people like Edumine, for example, who have done that very well for many years. But the problem almost being is how do you make sure that the cost of entry is low enough so that people can be able to get to that education? I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, one of the things we talked about just then, the massive open online course that Francis Wall and the team from CSM, Cameron School of Mines, have put together. It's a free course, but it's quite detailed. It runs over several weeks. It's got a lot of modules on where minerals come from, how we process them, the impacts on the environment and local communities. So that is they're a free course, and it's not a master's or it's not a university degree, but it's a tangible course which will teach a lot, and it can be done for free and in your own time. So that's one method.
Fantastic. So I know there is so much more that we could talk about, and the questions continue to come in. I should also mention as well that next week there is an Edumine course running on responsible mining, and yes, I will actually be delivering that. So if you haven't heard enough from me this week, then do look at the Edumine website and feel free to sign up for that. But Lucy and Ben, absolutely fantastic as always. Thank you so much. So round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the wonderful Lucy Crane and Ben Lepley. Brilliant. So we're going to move straight along to another absolutely fantastic initiative that I'm so excited by, not just because I know that Maria can do amazing things with Zoom, but Maria Capello, who you can see has just appeared on your screens in front of you, is going to introduce us to the Geophysical Sustainability Atlas. So Maria, over to yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. And I am very happy that we will have the opportunity to share today the Geophysical Sustainability Atlas, because it ties very well with what we just have spoken about, the future generations. So what we did is for the future generations, and in a way, let me put my image here a little bit smaller. What we did is for you, for the young generations. And this is why we really want to do it in a way that is appealing for all. So let me put myself where it's not bothering anyone. Yes, like here. And with this, we start. So I'm going to talk today to you about the responsible raw materials. And I hope that you are looking at the screen. Can you give me a nod with your hand? Yes, Sarah? Everything okay? Perfect. So we start. And as a way of introduction, I would like to tell you that the slides that you will see today are the results of many hours of my work and other people's work. Please try not to copy them. But if you do, because they are so great that you cannot resist, please acknowledge the authorship. So thank you very much. We start. And as a way of introduction, I would like to share with you some initiatives and concepts that are related to why we did this Geophysical Sustainability Atlas. And well, this is a sad image because it's an image related, right, to a earthquake, as you can see. So when I go to a party all my life and people ask, what do you do? And people will answer, well, I am a lawyer, Oh, great. Or I am a doctor. Oh, fantastic. What are you? They ask me. And I have to answer, I am a geophysicist. And there is a silence in the room. Because if you think about that, when you think who is a geophysicist, if you have good memory, you will probably remember that a geophysicist is this person, right, that just appears in your TV screen to explain about what happened with an earthquake, and that most certainly you were not aware, and that we couldn't predict the earthquake. So there are all kinds of geophysicists, but they only appear in our lives when probably it's too late due to a tsunami or an earthquake or an issue that has happened. So because of that, and perhaps to further worsen the situation, when we see that around us, there is these discussions about sustainability, the situation gets even worse for us geophysicists, because what is that we do about this? And what I'm showing to you is a aerial, how you say, a drone image of a deposit of tires, for your cars. And if you think about that, what happens with the tires of your car when you just discard them? Well, I lived 15 years in Kuwait, and I didn't know that all these photos are from a cemetery of tires that was just like 1 hour away from my house in Kuwait. So as a geophysicist, I didn't know how can I help. I mean, we are all concerned about sustainability and how can we help support the planet. And this is an aerial view of that cemetery of tires. And as you can see, all these are the parcels where these huge accumulations of old and discarded tires were there. So I was feeling even worse about the whole situation. And I was thinking, okay, how can we help? And it was just, the whole surroundings that we have, in the sense that, okay, we need to shift, right, totally going towards renewable energies. We are moving, we are changing. And I was working mostly in the energy sector. I'm very sensible about mining and the oil and gas sectors, which were the sectors that employed the most geophysicists of all. So how to handle, and what was our value proposition? Well, our value proposition of a geophysicist still had to be declared, or at least, expressed in a way that needed to be appealing for whom? For the young generations, right? So one day I was entering the United Nations building, one of many they have all over the world. This particular one was in Kuwait. And I was marveled by all these SDGs coming, that were hanging from the ceiling. And I was thinking, oh, wow, this is like a solution, in the sense, these are the sustainable development goals. And I was thinking what I am doing as a geophysicist in this global initiative. So what is sustainability? And I started to educate myself about that. And sustainability is meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own. And I learned that the 3 pillars of sustainability are the economic development, the social development, with an environmental protection. So I thought that as a geophysicist, I was always working towards the economic development, because in my case, I was working in oil and gas, but many of my colleagues were working in mining and so many vital and vibrant sectors of the economy. But then I thought, okay, if these are the 17 sustainable development goals, and these are the targets that we have for 2030, what are we doing about that? So we had an idea, right? This is the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I encourage you to learn more about that. But the question was, what is the relevance of these Sustainable Development Goals for the key stakeholders in geophysics, which was my realm? And I started to understand and to research what was going on in the world, to realize that the main oil and gas companies were already talking in terms of the SDGs. that I had become so familiar with, right? And not only the big companies, but also the small, the national companies and independent companies in oil and gas. They were expressing themselves with this kind of approach. Also the mining, and here I have listed some of the mining companies as an example. And you probably recognize this lady. She's Bobby Foote, one of the highest ranked women in the leadership of mining. And she went in person to Geneva to present the plan of her company, BHP, for the Sustainable Development Goals. Wow. So not only that in mining and oil and gas, but also, as you know, this is Bill Gates now with other problems in his plate, but he was also supporting the SDGs in a very visible way. And he appointed goalkeepers for the Melinda and Gates Foundation that they are still going to advance in order to support this progress of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we had this idea. Let us map geophysics to the Sustainable Development Goals, creating what we call the Geophysical Sustainable Atlas. I did this with two awesome professionals who are Anna Shognesi, who is the president-elect of SCG, and Emir Kastling, who is an expert geoscientist that is currently working in sustainability. So what we did is we created this mapping and we drafted an article that many of you perhaps do not know. This has been published open access by the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. And if you just Google that, Geophysical Sustainability Atlas, you will find it. The atlas encompasses the mapping for every SDG of the 17, that colorful framework that we just showed, and we compile everything in what we call the wheel. And what is that? Well, the wheel is a summary of this kind of, mapping that my two co-authors and I did to every one of the SDGs, from the 1 to the 17. So this is kind of, let me show you this, and you will probably enjoy this a lot. The wheel is like a mirror. If you are a geophysicist, you can say, oh, you can pinpoint, I am contributing to this and that. So this will help us, and not for nothing, but isn't it beautiful? It helps us a lot in portraying what was the message. And the message is that, as you can see, geophysicists, and by extension, all geoscientists, contribute to every single SDG. Wow. So what is the Sustainability Atlas about? I mean, if you would ask, well, this is a compilation of the individual mapping we did for every single of the SDGs, as you already know, right? And what is that we do? So if we were to ask, and I think you know this lady, don't you? Is she here? Hello? Yes, she is here. And she has the same question we have. How do we apply this atlas? And the way we apply this atlas, let me show you. This is me explaining the atlas. So let's take one of the SDG that I know is close to your heart because it's affordable and clean energy, in which mining has a lot to say. Well, the atlas, what they have is three main components: the mapping, the collaboration opportunities, and the enablers, which are the techniques. And what we did is that we developed the mapping, and we explain in the first paragraph what is it about. In the second part, we talk about the collaboration and expansion opportunities. And in the color blocks, we explain what are the geophysical enablers. As you can see, we give some examples of what is the individual, geophysical techniques and elements that support that particular SDG. So in a nutshell, and if I were to explain to you what is this Geophysical Sustainability Atlas, it is a platform. It is a platform to understand that geophysicists are in the front row line to support the SDGs. And this is a photo of the many sessions that we had, one of the many sessions that we had. These are my two co-authors, Anna Shaughnessy and Immer Kasling, and this is, of course, is me who is talking to you right now. And what we created is something that the three pillars with which I started my presentation, which are the economic development, the social development, and the environmental protection, the three pillars of sustainability, they are all can be explained with the Geophysical Sustainability Atlas. So when we published this as an open access, it went kind of viral in LinkedIn, and it was, reposted, reshared, and I encourage you to take a look and see and find it in LinkedIn and in Google and share it yourselves, because what we do in geophysics is also good for raw materials and for mining. And we were so happy that in particular, several universities, Manchester University, Oklahoma University, and the Oklahoma State University have used the wheel, this summary, in order to promote their own geophysical bachelor degrees, which is great, right? So what are our next steps? Our next steps are to raise the awareness about this atlas. And with this, I want to appreciate very highly the invitation we received to present today to you. So we want to expand the atlas to all geosciences, and we have already started that because we need a new wheel, larger for all geosciences, and we want to integrate sustainability initiatives. We believe aggregation and collaboration is stronger than working alone. And the big thanks go to everybody who collaborated preparing and contributing to this atlas, because there were many people we contacted and we received advice and guidance from. Today, we also would like to thank enormously and from our heart, Ludivine Wouters, who enable our contact for this great conference. So thank you very much. These are the next steps. And what we did is for the kids. This is what we want, that they build the future and they understand geophysics, and by extension, geoscience is key for everything we do. So keep in touch, and with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That is absolutely brilliant, Maria. A massive round of applause from all of us for yourself, and the comments that have been coming in via all channels to say, oh my goodness me, this is brilliant. This is really exciting. So thank you for that. Also, just to use this as a bit of a marketing thing, later on in the week, we've got Joel Gill, who'll be coming to talk to us about his book that has recently been published. And Maria, I'm sure you're fully aware of this one as well, and know Joel very, very well.
We are working with Joel because Joel is part of the core team that we put together in order to build and expand what we did to all geosciences. And Joel is going to be pivotal for this effort. He's one of our next, let's say, collaborators, co-author, and co-leaders of this initiative. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Maria. That is awesome. And then the other thing actually as well, where organizations are using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals almost as that framework to leverage. So tomorrow morning at 9:40 UK time, we're going to be joined by Zach Wood and Julie Rosa, so one of his team members from DBK, and they actually use the Sustainable Development Goals whilst working with companies to say, okay, given your budgetary spend, given your actions that you're actually taking, are you truly beginning to address some of these areas of the UN SDGs, which is really exciting. So Maria, just one quick question, and they are coming in thick and fast on Q&A, etc. What can we do to help and support you in this next step? Do you need anything from the wider community, or is it a case where we can just make use and keep sharing all of the wonderful tools that you've already put together?
Well, there are two things. This was not prepared. This question comes out of the blue to me, but there are two things you can do. First, help us sharing by quote unquote liking the things that we post in Twitter and LinkedIn and resharing those with your own comments and vision. But secondly, if you have any examples of the applicability of this atlas or questions about how to apply this mapping to the SDG to your everyday work, we would be happy to support you, and we will need those examples in order to include those in the new version that we are doing, which is an expansion for all geosciences.
Perfect. I'm sure that we can leverage everybody who's here today to help you with that. And my other half, he is a geophysicist. So he is celebrating off stage at the moment saying, see, geophysics is, of course, the future. So brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Maria, to yourself and to your team for this absolutely awesome piece of work. So round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the lovely Maria. Thank you very much, Maria. Brilliant. So on to our next fabulous speaker. Peter, I don't know if we've managed to get your slides to work. If they are working, if you want to attempt to hit share now, or if Rose is sharing for you, I'll let you guys go ahead with regards to that. So Peter comes to us, and he's going to be talking to us today about bringing miners, investors and Indigenous communities together with other participants shouldn't be as rare as it is. So why that whole value chain approach is so important to responsible sourcing and why it makes sense. And yes, we can see your slides. Peter, if you want to introduce yourself more fully, please do go for that now. And your time starts now. Thank you very much, sir.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Maria, for a very interesting presentation. I'm actually part of the 17 Rooms initiative from Brookings and Rockefeller Foundation, which is the 17 SDGs. So found that fascinating. So good morning, everyone. I'm talking to you from actually Southern California, and it's a New Zealand accent if you're wondering. The Development Partner Institute is an organized non-profit that I founded with Mark Kutafani, the CEO of Anglo American, 5 years ago after 3 years of work at the Kellogg Innovation Network out of the Kellogg School of Management. And we'll talk a little bit more. You'll get a sense for the DPI, which is really a multi-stakeholder platform to reimagine the mining industry from being an extractive business model to one of being a true development partner. And to your point, Maria, that's about economic, social, and environmental prosperity for all. What we're talking about today is our responsible sourcing initiative and why a whole value chain approach to responsible sourcing not only makes sense, but is actually the only way to achieve that. And let's talk about what that looks like, what that is. Let me move my slide. So the purpose of the Responsible Sourcing Coalition that we formed in 2019 is to accelerate the creation of a whole of value chain response. And really, as I mentioned, is to move the mining industry and use this as an impetus to go from an extractive model to a true development partner that streamlines first customer efforts and action. By customers, we mean people at the end of the value chain that are the ultimate users of metals and minerals. Be able to accommodate commodity and regional differences, but also very importantly balances the value, burden and capability of these initiatives across key members of the value chain. And in particular, we're talking here about the communities and Indigenous people that often do not have a voice at the table. This is an initiative that we are doing in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's very important, and this aligns well with their key mission, which is to really bring people out of poverty around the world. And we're very delighted to have the support specifically for this initiative from Schneider Electric and Rio Tinto. So let's talk about a little bit more about what we mean by whole of value chain. So these are the organizations that are involved in this initiative, which started, you'll see in a journey map in late 2019. So we have major brands from the miners, the suppliers to the industry and fabricators. So it includes BHP, Rio Tinto, Anglo American, AngloGold Ashanti, and many more. Consumer-facing companies, critically investors, both long-term investors like Hermes, big investment banks are representing debt and equity, academia, NGOs, faith, and Indigenous people. And when we've convened these people, it's often the very first time that they have actually been in a room together and listened. And we'll talk about why the benefits of whole of value chain is important. So Paul Polman, who used to be the CEO of Unilever, said the only way to get change in any one segment of a value chain is to get the entire value chain participating. And insofar as we know, this is a fairly unique initiative in bringing these people together in a multitude of ways. So what's the journey look like? So November 2019, interesting timing actually, we convened about 25 multi-stakeholder leaders at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, which is actually on Lake Bellagio on Lake Como in Italy. And we are actually convened in a 15th century former Cistercian monk monastery, which was very inspiring. And from that initiative came a series of actions, which because of COVID resulted in over a 15-month period, multi-stakeholder sprints. And this was bringing different stakeholder groups together, either entirely as whole of value chain. And recently we had, for example, investors with community members, Indigenous people from around the world, as well as with consumer-facing companies. And really what it is about building trust, creating the challenging conversations that people don't really want to have. And the next steps is really to now move into continuing the dialogue, but also taking specific actions towards this. And what I'm talking about here is not actually about standards. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in a minute. So often people ask us, what are the drivers for responsible sourcing? So first is consumers and the companies that face consumers. So if you notice from the slide, we have people like BMW, General Motors, Tiffany's and Microsoft involved. And they are very specific in that they want to be able to, at some point in the future, be able to put a label, if you like, on their products and say, these are responsibly sourced. And often that raises the question, what does that mean? You know, so there's obviously the climate change, emissions aspect, human rights, no harm to communities by any actions. So they are driving very strongly to have that happen and pushing it up the value chain. Investor activism, which we all know about, and that's also both from the equity markets and the people that issue debt. And I think that's gaining a significant amount of momentum. And then the social license issues, that miners need to be true development partners. I think another thing that's really driving this responsible sourcing now is, as the world starts a renewed push into a net zero emissions world, is the IEA for the first time published a report on the metal minerals demands for the key electrical metals, copper, cobalt, lithium, nickel, etc. And the need of production in the next 30 years is like 20-fold increase in tonnage across these metals. So how the mining industry can responsibly mine an unprecedented scaling of the production, I think is a real challenge. And I think that's complicated actually by record prices that they're receiving at the moment. Because often when industries are awash in profits and free cash flow, it actually diminishes the imperative to act on other things that other people in society may deem important. So I think there's conflicting pressures on the industry, so very interesting. So some of the key insights from the work so far is, this is staggering. We stopped the research, but right now the mining industry has 52 responsible sourcing standards and counting. In fact, we counted over 100. These include everything from broad standards like SASB and GRI, but through to very specific mining standards, responsible steel, there's responsible cobalt, there's responsible aluminium, and it just goes on and on. One of the key insights was that the consumer-facing companies like the auto manufacturers go, we have 14 critical metals and minerals. We can't have 14 standards. You need to adopt one standard. And the industry response is, well, we need to be able to cater for the different commodity and regional differences. So there needs to be kind of a rationalization around that, which I think is really, really important. And our initiative is not about getting to a single standard. It's about developing action, because our firm belief is that we can have action and transparency before we get to a specific standard. So there's progress being made, but we need to accelerate that and match the needs of the different stakeholders. The Indigenous and community representatives, there's a phrase, we need to put the I into ESG, and that is I for Indigenous. This is really quite missing. So the First Nations in Canada group did a research project recently and looked at the top 15 sustainability initiatives or standards like GRI, SASB, and so on. And Indigenous people were only mentioned twice in two standards, once in GRI and once in SASB, in a very small way. So, and there's a lot of unintended consequences. And a lot of the consumer-facing companies now are also saying it's not sufficient for us to know from our ultimate suppliers that there's no harm being done to Indigenous people or communities, that we need full visibility through to the communities and Indigenous people where mines are located. And also investors are starting to take those positions as well. So there's a greater push for transparency throughout the value chain. One of the other key insights is a common language, understanding, and purpose. There's real disconnects, particularly between all the business people who speak really in technocrat language, miners, investors, etc., and communities, indigenous people that really speak in human terms and in stories. And there's a great void and gap in terms of understanding. So that really needs to be deepened. And really about deepening that human connection, because I think once you get people in the room, people lose their organizational armor. And the other thing is really a deepened understanding of what a supply chain really is and each role member in the value or supply chain. Because again, we're finding that people don't have a full as an understanding as you may expect them to have. I mean, obviously the consumer facing companies do, but other participants don't have as deep an understanding. So what's next for us? We're going to continue our discussions because change happens, as we say, one person, one organization, one engagement at a time. So we'll continue to build this mutual understanding and trust via these multi-stakeholder dialogues that will continue globally and hopefully be back in person by early next year. We are going to publish a couple of position papers in the next 3 to 4 months around a couple of the tough issues that have really been surfaced during the previous sprints that we really hope will catalyze a broad-based global discussion on some of these tough issues and continue to build unexpected partnerships. One of the actions that came out, interestingly, was one of those investor groups had really not a lot of visibility into communities. And I fast forward 18 months, they were very focused on climate change issues. They've taken an increased interest in communities and have in fact just hired an Indigenous person to be a community manager inside the investment firm to help them understand more the needs and impacts on communities, Indigenous people globally by the mining industry. So that's really a quick tour of the RESCO initiative. These 7 slides are really an accumulation of an enormous amount of work from the DPI team, which is global, as well as all the different organizations that you see listed there. So Sarah and Rose and everyone, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this initiative. I don't know if I gave it justice in this quick sprint, but happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Peter. And you certainly did do it justice. So ladies and gentlemen, from behind your muted microphones, a massive round of applause for the fantastic Peter Bryant. So brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Peter. And just while the questions are coming in on Q&A, in the chat, on YouTube, etc. Peter, you mentioned that, so there are 52 different standards that might be vaguely applicable and counting. And of course, the trick is almost that pleading with the world not to invent any more standards, please, but help us navigate through them. Do you have any tips on how to navigate that forest of standards?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a huge complexity. So I think a couple of things are happening. One is each of the standards are trying to rationalize themselves. So there's starting to be more collaboration between them. I think, it gets back to actually a little bit of what Maria said. I think, there's some standards that you can adopt, but also at the same time, I think standards may not be enough. I think companies need to say, based on my own values, these are the things I will do that will often exceed a standard. And I'll provide full transparency. And I think there's enough initiatives around the world like Bloomberg that are testing companies to, are they doing what they say they will do and reporting that out. So I think that kind of more almost voluntary enforcement mechanisms combined with transparency will help a lot more until we get to standards. So because I think if you try and grapple with standards, it just gets too complex. It does. Everybody just kind of gets tired. So that would be my advice, actually.
So just with that, and there's a great question that's come in from Amanda, and she asks, are there any examples of other industries that have this same kind of wide array of standards and how they have managed to converge those standards successfully?
Actually, it's interesting. Yeah, this is pretty unique, actually. So there are some great initiatives. So the auto industry, and people always argue these are good or bad. So they had a great initiative around rubber, actually. Where they collapsed all the standards. So all the auto companies got together with the tire companies and actually collapsed into a single standard around rubber. So as one, and I think some of the food commodities are likewise, with cocoa and coffee. So I think, food commodities can often be the place to look for more advancing. And the other complication too, Sarah, is like, you've got SASB, GRI, and now you've got the World Economic Forum trying to rationalize all those into a single standard. So it's, until the market kind of dictates one, that everybody has to follow. So it's tough.
And do you think that, I mean, obviously there's a reason why each of these 52 standards has been written, and often the purpose of the standard is actually something quite different to what somebody might then need to use it for. There's a question here from John Clark that's come in over the Q&A, and he says, well, shouldn't government be setting these standards? What do you think about that, Peter?
Ooh, yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I always go back, surprising, I'm an accountant by profession way back a long time ago, but I think you just follow how accounting standards have evolved, right? And so people wanted to have full trust in the financial information that companies disclosed, right? So eventually, through independent bodies, those standards were set, and then audit. And the key is auditing, right? And then who audits those? So, because the key thing is the ability to compare and contrast companies. How do I know BHP is doing better than Vale or better than Anglo? I don't know, because I think governments can. I don't think government should set the standards. I think it's too slow, but I think they can provide impetus and maybe kind of direction and guardrails, I always say, versus setting them themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, that's something as well where we heard yesterday a little bit about mining codes, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess you've got the purpose for those standards, and then you get standards and standards. There's almost the regulation stuff that often comes along behind. Yes. And then actually what is a company doing internally, which almost talks to your point earlier of saying, well, no, our values are this, so therefore we're going to meet that.
Exactly, yeah.
So with this as well, Peter, I mean, you mentioned that out of all of those different standards, only 2 of them vaguely mentioned Indigenous people. Is that none of them used the words Indigenous peoples, but referred to that group of people in a different way, or they just totally excluded them?
No, silent on communities. So GRI mentioned, so it was a combination of, they're looking for all references to community, Indigenous people, whatever. So it wasn't just Indigenous. GRI mentioned, for example, you have no problem with communities if you have no legal lawsuits with them. So the communities, Indigenous people are really, because they're being managed as a risk, that's the problem. So versus partners. So, and I think that's a real wrestling match. And in this world of increased transparency and engagement, I think Indigenous people's voices are rising, and they want resource development done in a responsible way, but in a way that drives their prosperity. And it's difficult because there's just so many different community representatives, different tribes, depending on what countries you are. So it's complicated, but that doesn't mean it should be ignored. So.
It is indeed complicated. And I think this is something here where all the way through this conference, we are really, really excited to have a whole wide range of speakers. I mean, including the next speakers who are upcoming in a second, to actually delve into that really complex yet exciting world of the social aspects and trying to understand communities a bit better. And I know that Catherine's going to be leading on a session at the end of today that dives into that in a bit more detail. So with that, Peter, you mentioned that hopefully later on this year, you're going to be going back to face-to-face events, bringing together all of those different stakeholders. Do you have online things in the meantime, or is it really focusing in on writing those papers?
No, we have online. So we do what we call sprints online. So we're doing those about every 6 to 7 weeks now with different combinations. So we have later in June, we're bringing all that whole of value chain back together after we've done a series of kind of, one stakeholder group with another and bringing those findings back. So, yeah, and I think everybody's very engaged to kind of accelerate, because we're charting a path that's very different to a lot of the other, kind of standards-based initiatives. So, yeah, so we're excited.
Exciting.
It is very.
And I am seeing, as we do actually have time available, I think you're obviously being very concise with your answers, Peter, because this is glorious. We can get through loads of questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm used to this.
Rukia, and apologies if I have mispronounced your name, asks us, how can we prevent unauthentic representation of responsible value chains, i.e. how we sometimes occasionally see greenwashing within industry? So how can we try and prevent that?
Wow, big question. Yeah, so that's a huge question.
60 seconds, starting now.
30 seconds, yes. That's really hard. So I think three comments there. One is the consumer-facing brands like Tiffany's, BMW, Microsoft. they have pretty strong procurement checking, So I think where they have shifted from is not just only checking their direct suppliers, but they want way more visibility all the way back in the value chain. So that's one check, and they'll call out their suppliers. Two is, I think, those kind of voluntary initiatives like Bloomberg, calling out companies. And their recent program, I think they said about 30% of companies are meeting what they said, about 30% are kind of on the way, and 30% are just not walking the talk. So that's the third one. And I think then companies themselves just have to be very transparent and honest about the challenges. So I think it's important to have aspirations and to say, Mark Cutifani is very good at this. This is what I want to do. I know the path to these things, but we're kind of figuring out the path to these. I just don't know. And I think that's the best way to do. And I think corporations really struggle in showing vulnerability and saying, we actually don't have the answers to these aspirations yet, but we're working on it. So, and I think that until we get to this auditing world, there's no perfect way to answer that question, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. And actually, I think there's going to be certainly some more talks later on the week in terms of that turning monitoring into actual metrics, etc. as well. So where we are checking up on different bits of the supply chain and who should be doing it as well. So of course, at the moment, there's a massive reliance on the mining company saying, hey, this is what we're doing. And everybody just having to believe that, which is fine. But then also there are other data sets, of course, that we can get hold of that then says, okay, what's really going on in that context, which helps the mining companies as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fabulous Peter Bryant. Thank you very much, Peter.
Sarah. And anybody can email me if they want to with questions. So.
Fantastic, Peter. Yeah, and if you want to answer some of them that have been coming through in the Q&A, go for it. That's fantastic.
Oh, cool. I will. Yep, I will. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. So next up, we have the fantastic Liz Friel and Rachel Decker. So Liz and Rachel, if you guys want to turn on those videos and turn off those mutes and share those slides and anything else that we need to do, actually answering some of the questions perhaps that were just posed or conundrums that were posed by Peter in terms of, okay, how do we deal with this social space and very complex problems that we might be looking at? And we've got Liz and Rachel who are going to talk to us about the next generation social investment, new tools to support community resilience. So Liz and Rachel, over to yourselves.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to be here. So as Sarah just said, we are super excited to share with you today a vision and some tools for better ways that raw materials companies can align with this notion of responsible by actually engaging in social investment activities that truly support broad-based prosperity and community resilience. So we are Liz and Rachel, co-founders of Simpact. Simpact is a sustainability think tank and ESG consultancy based in Vancouver, Canada, that works predominantly with the mining and metals sector. And we're really focused on helping companies not just measure and report, but actively achieve and mature strong performance across the ESG spectrum with a very particular focus on the S in ESG. So first, the context of what we're talking about today. There's a lot of research out there that shows that despite the good intentions, all over the world, the mining sector is still struggling to share benefits and contribute to the growth of vibrant local communities in a lasting way. So there are a lot of reasons for this that we can't dive into with just 10 minutes. But what's important to note is that lately the specific ESG area is facing an increasing level of scrutiny from investors. It's a growing risk area. Even just this morning, the International Institute for Environment and Development actually released a new report with the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, showing how all over the world, we are seeing an absolutely exponential increase in legislation requiring community development contributions by industry. So the trend is clear. Societal expectations are rapidly growing to move beyond the mindset of just zero harm to actively play a way greater role in creating positive, lasting social impact outside the fence.
And so that brings us to the question of how do companies relate to the communities that they operate in? So many of us are familiar with the current shift from shareholder primacy on the left of the slide to taking a stakeholder lens in the middle. And that last one considers the expectations of groups that have a stake in how you operate. So your employees, your suppliers, your customers, and the communities that you operate in. And in that middle illustration, you can see that there are areas where company interest and society interest overlap. So those overlaps are spaces where you could conceivably create win-win opportunities. So for example, your company could contribute to a local food bank, or it could provide scholarships for local students to become remote haul truck operators. So the result is that the community benefits and your company builds relationships and social acceptance, and it will be able to hire qualified employees locally. So a win-win. But in reality, companies are not, in fact, separate from the society and the environment, with some overlapping areas of interest. They are deeply embedded in the communities in which they operate. And those communities, in turn, are embedded in broader ecosystems. And ultimately, we're all part of the broader planet and need to operate within its planetary boundaries, as is illustrated on the right there. So, in the long term, community resilience, or whether a community thrives, affects your company's success. And we know this, right? COVID-19, as devastating as it continues to be, is also a very unfortunate but clear illustration of how the health of communities around you can affect your company, the way it operates, if it operates, and even its profitability. Or for another example, you can think of worker days that are lost to malaria based on your context, or the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, or the levels of educational attainment around your mine, and whether you are able to procure or hire locally as a result of that. Or you can even think more broadly about climate change and the potential disruptive risks that poses to companies. So all of that to say, it is important to take a systems lens and to recognize that companies are embedded in these broader systems. That companies benefit when these systems are resilient, that understanding this helps companies manage disruptive risk that comes from those systems. And lastly, that social investment is a strategic tool in supporting the resilience of local communities, while also contributing to your company's broader social performance and its social license.
So as a disclaimer, a social investment is not a silver bullet, nor can it exist in a silo. Now, a lot of great work has been done on social performance and, understanding the root of social license over a decade now by a number of industry veterans and in mining. But in addition to the foundational notions that many of us are familiar with now, managing your impacts, engaging properly, showing procedural fairness, fostering trustworthiness, upholding your social contract, and so on, effective social investment, when it is embedded in a robust social management approach, like if you look at the simplified diagram here on the left, really helps your company to deliver more than just zero harm and truly maximize benefits to society. And we believe this will increasingly be core to fostering social acceptance in the future, as well as anticipating and mitigate your company risk in any industry, I should say. And that is a big part of, again, linking to responding to evolving societal expectations.
So we're seeing that leading companies are moving away from this focus on philanthropy and sponsorship. And so what we put together here are some considerations that we think will be helpful for companies that are looking to contribute to long-term thriving communities using social investment. So first, we would suggest that you focus on what resilience means locally and what local priorities are. Now, that said, there are many communities that do not have clearly articulated visions for this, and that's just the reality. But in those cases, there may be an opportunity for your company to support the development of that vision by the community. Next, we recommend investing in systems level initiatives. And now that doesn't mean that you now need to ignore the needs of your local food bank or local women's shelter. But what it does mean is that you should also consider contributing to initiatives that sort of dig below the surface to address the cause of these kind of deeply rooted challenges like food insecurity or gender-based violence. And lastly, and we'd say this applies broadly, it is important for the lasting success of these kinds of initiatives to support co-creation and co-design of the initiatives, and to respectfully involve people with lived experience along other types of experts. And then moving on to the next slide. So in addition to these emerging approaches, we've also wanted to highlight that there's a number of new tools that help companies decide, implement, and fund these kinds of efforts. So the first one here is the prioritization radar. It was developed by the Embedding Project, and we contributed to the social and governance dimensions of it. This tool, it offers companies a systematic process to explore emerging sustainability risk and opportunity. So across their operations, across their value chain, across the broader ecosystem, and then to rank it to rank sort of their strategic relevance to the business. So basically it helps companies prioritize how to best deploy their resources in this space. And so this radar, unlike materiality processes that we may be familiar with, is actually designed to inform company strategy, and not exclusively for social investment, but certainly for social investment as part of broader organizational strategy. And then next, we have social innovation. That term describes initiatives that challenge the status quo of social systems that have these deeply rooted issues, like maybe unemployment or homelessness or poverty and others. And the goal is then to create lasting transformation for the better, of course. And solutions labs are one example of a social innovation initiative. So essentially, you'd bring together a broad range of groups or individuals that have an interest, a stake, or experience in a particular challenge, and you'd invite them to co-create solutions to help address the challenge, bringing together their varied expertise, their particular perspective, and if relevant, resources that might support it. So for example, there may be a solutions lab to collectively address food security in some communities where that's relevant. One concept we designed was for a company facing a possible permit extension or closure. So they weren't sure at the time which it was going to be. And they wanted to engage the broader community in a conversation about local economic resilience. The goals of that engagement were, on the one side, that community members, organizations, and the company could build the new connections to potentially collaborate and build these new solutions together. But the second one is that the company would better understand its place in that bigger picture of the ecosystem, and sort of what opportunities there were for them to contribute to economic resilience, including in the case of closure, if that were to happen. So them as part of that broader ecosystem. And another initiative that we're currently hosted is a company-funded, but a community-led, coordinated regional approach to community wellness. It's in a group of remote northern communities in Alaska. And in this case, there's a group of key community organizations and their representatives that are collaborating to create a lab that will bring the broader community together to co-design solutions that tackle community wellness at a systems level for the benefit of the whole broader region. So these are some ways that companies are investing in social innovation to manage their social risk and to foster their social license.
So the last tool that we want to highlight here is social impact investment, a much overused term. But to start with, I have a definition here of the word investing, which I think is really valuable to sort of drive home the point. An investment is to allocate money with the expectation of a positive benefit, return, or tangible result in the future, which does not really reflect the approach that the vast majority of mining companies are still taking in what they call community investment or corporate social investment. And so what we want to show with this tool is actually a spectrum of vehicles for impact. And in particular, let's take a page out of the investment world's book, the intentional maturing beyond mere philanthropy, to really focus on tangible, broad, sustainable future results. So if you look at the spectrum here on the far left side, you see traditional philanthropic activities. Here, your community investment activities are relatively siloed, usually ad hoc. The focus is on inputs like dollars spent and sometimes outputs, basically the sort of stuff that you'll see that goes into your GRI report at the end of the year. Now, this kind of spend largely provides a reputational or a short-term benefit, but it's rarely sustainable in its impact on big picture, wicked problems at a systems level. And the reality is, in mining, too many of our initiatives that are intended to contribute to community development do still live on this far left end. And typically there is a time and a place, but if all your dollars are going there, you're probably not being very effective in your efforts. So as we move from left to right, we start to see different types of market tools, partnerships, investment style vehicles. And here we're explicitly designing beyond the fence line, beyond the time-bound mining life cycle, and positioning the mine as only one of many actors in the system. So what that means is more stakeholder collaboration, co-creation, this idea of doing with versus doing for. And there's a drive for measurable outcomes and returns, whether they be financial or social, as well as a core focus on lasting multi-party outcomes and, again, broad-based prosperity. So some examples of what we could do at the right side of the spectrum might be no interest loans, impact investment funds, business incubators, social impact bonds, community mineral development equity, and profit sharing in the mine itself. So with these new tools, we believe social investment can be a very strong risk management tool. And in fact, in the future, we think it may well be the way forward for mining companies themselves, not just their social investment programs. So lastly, if you are interested in the subject of community resilience and would like some further reading, we'd encourage you to check out this guide that we recently created for the embedding project, specifically on helping companies understand community resilience and what their role can be. So with that, we will wrap up. A big thank you for your attention and huge thank you to Sarah, Rose, and the team for bringing us together today. We would love to hear your thoughts, maybe any experiences you have with what we've been chatting about today, and of course, questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Liz and Rachel. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together from behind your microphones for an absolutely fantastic talk. Peppered or littered, should I say? Actually, no, littering's bad. Filled with fantastic tools and techniques that we can use with regards to this area. So that's brilliant. And I think that actually, so this talk we've just heard now goes really, really nicely with the talk that Susan Joyce gave yesterday. So when we're looking at what does that S look like within ESG, and I suspect you guys know one another very well, seeing as you all live in the same neck of the woods, as it were. So just while we're waiting for a load of the other questions that are coming in thick and fast via lots of different channels, etc. Liz, am I right in saying that you have a podcast?
I do have a podcast, yes. It is called Prospecting Purpose. It's hosted by Simpact, and we actually just launched it 4 weeks ago, so it's brand new. We are releasing an episode every Wednesday at the moment, and actually a number of our guests are part of this conference too, which we're really excited to see.
Fantastic. And if you want to advertise that podcast at all, stick it into the chat, because I'm sure that lots of people will be interested in that. And Rachel, I mean, I guess with regards to Simpact, is this a recently set up company, or have you guys been going for a long while?
A little bit of both, I guess. We launched the brand in March, so the brand is pretty recent, but Liz and I have worked together for quite some time. We started building this company last year. So this has been in the works for a while. It's just the brand has been out there a little bit more recently. So it looks brand new, but it's been a longer term collaboration for sure.
Fantastic. And so what was your impetus, I guess, for setting it up? Because it's a fabulous brand, and you've certainly pulled together some brilliant bits and pieces and tools and techniques within it.
Ooh, the impetus, I guess it's partly that we were, we have complementary skill sets and a shared interest in actually supporting the industry and doing better in the space of S in particular, the social space in particular. We found ourselves both doing independent work and thought we would be better together, bringing both our perspectives to the work and supporting each other that way. So that's a high level how it started. Pooling our skills, pooling our knowledge, pooling our ability to do this work together more effectively.
Brilliant. No, and it's fantastic. Massive congratulations on it. I'm going to pull Nick Copeland actually into this conversation, because I know we were messaging behind the scenes, really very much sparked by where your presentation started. So Nick, I don't know if you had any comments or questions you wanted to ask to Liz and Rachel.
Well, I think it's really fascinating because, again, these frameworks are then making questions that even go down to issues that are on the presidential election agenda in major mining countries like Peru. And that is live and imminent right now, with real potential for a significant lurch to the hard left in Peru. And a lot of the discussion is around, why are there poor people in a rich country where the mining royalties are so large? And of course, the canon minero has been an issue for more than a decade in terms of making sure that tangible benefits are seen, that local development programs are executed properly. And in many times, the provincial governments lack the local capacity to really engineer and deliver projects using the receipts. And then a large percentage also gets passed, through the back door to their accounts in offshore havens or other sort of corrupt enterprises, which is a real shame. But as a result, it's not really the mining company's fault, but perhaps they were too slow, too vague in how they ensured that the government was ensuring the local delivery of the royalties. And now it is coming and biting them extremely hard. And the presidential candidate who is in the lead is talking about nationalization. He's talking about renegotiation. Even the closest contender, Fujimori, has had to come up with a new idea around royalty disbursement. And she's saying that she will give 40% of royalties directly to the population. That is going to create a short-term gain, but perhaps a longer-term dependency on these royalties. Closure planning, my God. So I think I wanted to make that comment, but also ask Liz in particular, hi there, and say, how can the Peruvian government have got this so badly wrong? What can we as, professionals in the space do to help engage with these countries that should be doing better?
Mm-hmm. I think two thoughts come to mind. One is, I believe that your question is well answered by some of what Peter was just talking about. We don't get to solutions if we don't have everyone at the table. So the idea of companies and governments alone having a conversation, working together, it's not enough. And then the second thing I would say is also an idea that we're still very stuck on in the industry is the idea that royalties are enough, that royalties need to be sent in different direction. This is part of a bigger thing that is happening in the world. This is not mining specific. There is a growing expectation for business to be doing a hell of a lot more. Inequality has been growing and growing and growing, and there needs to be a better distribution and sharing of the benefits of the profit of business. That is what we are seeing at a macro level happen. So that really challenges, I think, the idea of how we've traditionally tried to share benefits. I don't know if that answers your question.
That was brilliant, Liz. Rachel, do you want to add anything into that?
Maybe just to say that that's one, obviously a very clear context where this is happening, but I would say it applies across the board for companies if they say have operations in one community and are looking to develop new projects elsewhere. The legacy, so to speak, that you create or the impact that you have now in other communities will affect anything you're looking to do elsewhere, right? It's not in isolation. So that I think is an important thing to flag.
Fantastic. So loads more that we could talk about here, but I'd just like to say another massive thank you very, very much to Liz and Rachel. Absolutely brilliant, and good luck with everything. So round of applause. Thank you very much, guys. Fantastic. Next up we have the fantastic Luke, and I'm going to let Luke introduce himself, and if he wants to come off mute, find those slides, etc. And Luke, I'm really excited because Luke is going to tell us what this thing called FPIC is actually all about. We've heard it mentioned, we've heard it interpreted as free, prior and informed consent, but what on earth does that actually mean? And it's something that is very, very common in certain disciplines, but actually trying to make it a reality across the breadth of raw materials as a whole can be really, really difficult. So Luke, I know that we're just finding your slides. There we go. Absolutely perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Luke. Luke, off you go.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, much appreciated, and glad to be here. So I'm speaking on behalf of the same organization that Susan Joyce actually spoke about yesterday. So it's the Social Practice Forum, and just by way of an introduction, this is I'm not going to repeat this, but basically we're a group of 65 practitioners. We are human rights practitioners. We are social performance practitioners. And it's a mix between consultants and human rights directors or social performance directors within companies. And then we have a few people that come from the academic background. And basically what we're trying to do is to push the needle a little bit. We are On a day-to-day basis, we can even compete with each other over the same kind of assignments. But what we all share is that we're collectively quite frustrated by the fact that we are having access to senior management teams and CEOs of companies largely in the extractives. But that, of course, sometimes we feel that it is much better to actually drive the message home from a group of people. So that's what we're doing. And so what we're doing is these kind of events, but also bring out a number of tools and a number of deliverables, of which I'm going to make a blatant pitch today. And that's about FPIC. So as you mentioned, Sarah, there is a bit of confusion internationally about, what is on the one side, FPS 7, you got the lender saying you need to do FPIC. We see it in the newspapers, we see it on their website, FPIC, and then there is a lack of clarity still what FPIC actually means and how it relates, for example, to UNDRIP and what's expected from companies. Then at the same time, you have companies that say, well, I want to do the right thing. I am an ICMM member, for example. I subscribe to position statement on indigenous peoples. I would like to be aligned with the performance standards. Some companies have UNDRIP in their internal standards. But what the heck does it really mean? Because it tells me what I need to do, but there doesn't seem to be a great clarity about how it actually works and how I need to implement it in the field. And then you go to the field and, we deal with it all the time, of course. You find yourself in a situation where a host government says, indigenous people, really? Really? We're all indigenous. We don't have indigenous peoples. Or you have, particularly in places like Africa, where the government, Tanzania is a good example, where the government has made a real effort to make sure that tribalism and differentiation between tribes is really kind of, it becomes more like a we. We are all part of the same country, and tribalism is really kind of systematically diminished in importance by various government policies. And therefore now we come in representing a company and we say, well, by the way, some people are extra special, right? So those people actually get some extra authority and have a right to actually, be consulted and ultimately to provide their consent. And of course, that becomes even more complex when the government is a joint venture partner and says, hell no, we don't do that. Or alternatively, when you have a situation where more tribes or groups or ethnicities say, well, we still have a tussle about whose traditional land we're actually talking about. So you have a situation in some places in Latin America, for example, or Central America, where not only does the government not recognize indigenous peoples, but at the same time, indigenous groups themselves are not really clear about the traditional land, and therefore it becomes difficult for a company to say, well, what are we actually talking about, and how do we do it? So if I get to the next slide, I'm just a technological disaster here. Yes. So then you get internally in the company, to make it even more complex, you have people that say, well, really, so we have a local tribe here, 500 people, 1,000 people. And are we going to, what does consent really mean? Is it 51%, or are we going to figure out how people actually themselves determine consent? And at what point do we actually make that decision? So the company really feels on the one side pulls in a direction that our corporate office and the lenders and their standards say, you must do this, FPIC, and a recognition of indigenous rights in particular circumstances, obviously. And on the other side, you get the government that says, well, not so fast, please. Now, the company then, and that's where we come in as social practitioners, we then get hired by these companies to say, now, what do we do? And that's an interesting space, because the company says, well, I can't really wait until everybody has figured out what FPIC really means and in what circumstances and what is the definition and how much is enough. And we also can't wait until the government actually makes up its mind. So the company deals with a lot of questions, very practical questions. And these are real questions. It is not hypothetical. And it also is not something, sorry, let me go back. That is also, something that I can't wait. So what we did as a social practice forum is to collect those experiences. We are not pretending to be the group that will say, well, this is FPIC and this is not. This is what it is and this is what it's not. This is what it's not. What our contribution, what we've tried to do, is to actually gather our experiences from our practice, from our social practice, from the companies we're working with. And what we have done in a primer is to basically collect experiences of how companies are dealing with these dilemmas on a day-to-day basis. How do they determine when free is really, how do you demonstrate that when free is free? How do you demonstrate that prior is really prior? What does informed really mean on the ground? And how on earth are you going to demonstrate the consent? And what does that mean in a particular situation? Because of course, this is very context specific. There is no one way to slice this. So the primer, that's what I'm talking about, is available on our website, and basically is a tool that hopefully will enable other companies or other practitioners to say, this is actually a helpful way of thinking about some of these very practical dilemmas, right? And it may, in some cases, be a way by which you say, well, it doesn't really fit my context, but at least I get a few ideas about how I can frame it inside the organization about what we need to do, or alternatively, how I can actually develop approaches to tackle these issues. And again, there is no value judgment here. It's a living document. And we would also invite everybody to provide alternative examples of experiences we have gathered, or alternatively to reach out to us and to say, this is a particular question that I have come across. Is there a group of people within the social practice forum? Can I drop it into the forum? Allow our members to actually chew on that question and see if they have any kind of practical experiences that address that particular challenge. And then hopefully over time, we will increase the robustness of this tool and continue to learn as a community of practice in terms of how we can do this. So that's the pitch. This is that's the tool. It's on our website. We're still fairly young. We have two deliverables. We have one is this very practical approach towards how to address FPIC related questions. We have another document that talks about competency framework. We have found that many companies are still kind of in an early stage of developing or determining actually what does it mean to be a competent social practitioner. And then we have a number of what we have called SP 101 papers. They will be out shortly, and that really is kind of aiming to clarify what is actually a difference between external affairs and social performance. Simple things like, what's the difference between having a chat and strategic stakeholder engagement? At what point do you start actually engagement? So we have a series. I think there's 12 of those that will be made public shortly, and will be we hope that they reach a broad audience. And again, it appeals to that common desire that we have as practitioners to kind of demystify some of these misconceptions in our idea, and also to respond to the I would say a bit of a frustration that we've had over the last 10-15 years, that some things simply need to stop. We talked in the session before, was really interesting to hear about issues about social investment and charity and philanthropy. Some of those practices we know work. We also know that some of those practices do not work and actually can create a lot of conflict. So what is it in social investment and engagement and grievance mechanism and resettlement that we need to demystify and to say, this is actually working, this is not working. So that's the high level pitch. And yeah, we'll be looking forward to any suggestions and piece of feedback.
Perfect. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Luke. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together from your side of those muted microphones. A wonderful thank you very much for Luke. Brilliant. So I think that's something there where things like license to operate, FPIC, etc. It's always really complicated to be able to, or difficult to explain that to somebody like an engineer, because it's not like a tangible thing you can grab hold of. Is that correct, Luke, or am I just still missing the point?
I would say that if you want to talk about social license to operate, it's actually pretty straightforward to talk to an engineer. But I think you have a really good point that we as practitioners often don't speak the language of the engineering organization we're into. But there are very simple tools, of course, in terms of how do you measure this stuff? Well, if you do a risk assessment and you see that as part of your initial social risk, and you do a follow-up risk 6 months later, and for example, you are seeing that your risk exposure has decreased due to your engagement, that would be one way to say, well, this is how you measure effectiveness. But if you talk in terms of the value of engagement, the way we often do it is to say this is really about making sure that you maintain the value of the asset, right? This is engagement. If you don't do engagement, this allows you to actually manage your contextual risk exposure. And I think the main issue with many people outside, or many of our colleagues, whether they're lawyers or accountants or engineers, there's often still, I think, a bit of a misconception about the fact that anything social is unpredictable, right? So you go into this black box, and well, I don't know whose grandmother was fighting with whose grandfather 10 years ago, and therefore things come out of the blue. Whereas we all know things never come out of the blue. There is a very predictable pattern, and the pressure cooker keeps building up. And then all of a sudden you get a trigger moment and you get the spark, and all of a sudden you got people moving to the gate, and the general manager says, well, where does this come from? Well, it wasn't that you run over that chicken or that you fired, there was a trigger event. But it is the predictability that I think we all need to focus on, to say human behavior is very predictable. And the manifestation of, the manifestation of poor company-community relations is different in Pakistan than it is in the UK or in Nigeria. But the underlying patterns are exactly the same. And if you keep focusing on those underlying patterns, then in fact it becomes as predictable as going to a mountain and drilling a hole in the ground and all of a sudden find some ore, which for me is like mind-boggling. And an engineer would say, it's very predictable. You follow process 1, 2, 3, 4. So we often kind of, when we talk about it with our members, it's often about, helping managers connect the dots and to say, let's demystify it. This is actually very predictable, and this is how it plays out. Yeah. So
Luke, there's a really nasty question that's come in for you, but it's from one of your co-speakers, Maria. So I'm gonna dump you in it because it's a brilliant question, by the way. So she says, okay, so if human behavior is so predictable, why are we still struggling so much to liaise with communities where we do mining or oil and gas, etc.?
Oh, well, it's a really good question, because it's the same question it's a brilliant question. I think it's multifaceted. So there is I think the reason why we're still struggling with it, let me put it this way. 15 years ago, when we said we don't know how to establish relations with communities, some managers would have had a point. By now, we know there's predictability, and it often is about a very simple concept. And I would say there's maybe only 3 key elements. It's about transparency and predictability and how you distribute your benefits. It's about being seen as taking responsibility for your impacts, whether it's influx management, it's your environmental management. And then there is this whole notion about being seen as a caring and respectful company. And of course, the engineer is saying, really, caring, responsible and respectful, I can't do anything with it. It doesn't fit into a spreadsheet. But of course, we all know if we go to the community and we say, what are the 5 or the 10 things that we need to do to demonstrate to you, community, that we are a caring company and that we are respectful? They will get back to us with really practical examples, right? So if we have a question, give us an answer, right? Because for us, it goes into a black box. If we have a complaint, don't send us a clerk, send us a decision maker, right? Involve us in decisions that affect our lives, right? Don't determine for us who is a local employee and who's an outsider, because your definition of local may be different than our definition of local. So pay your bills on time, which is unfortunately still not always the case, right? Tell your drivers to behave when they drive and they don't race through a community, so that we are really upset that we, from a safety perspective. So it is really kind of, it is going back to the community and bring that information back to the leadership to say, this is actually getting it right, and establishing good relationship is not rocket science. It is really following a series of steps that we all know. And I think there is, and it is providing that feedback to management to say, this is how you manage your social risk. This is, if you don't do it, you roll the dice. And if you roll the dice, you may be lucky and you roll a 6. But if you're unlucky, you roll a 1. If you don't have a mechanism in place to manage that, you basically are rolling the dice. So that's not a complete answer, but that's the first attempt.
That was brilliant, Luke. And I think that list of examples that you just gave in terms of, if we've got a problem, don't send a clerk, send a decision maker, things like that. It's those things that are so valuable to people of the kind of the broader working world. So that was absolutely brilliant. One final question, if I may, before we then switch gears quite considerably and we start looking at tailings. And this one comes in from Julie, and she asks, are there any resources available similar to the FPIC primer that look at how to define, assess, monitor, etc., broader community support? And I'm sure there are many out there, but I don't know if you've got a favorite.
Well, it's a really good question, because in fact, there are not many. This is something, in fact, we have a session in a few days from now with a major mining company that's actually exactly asking that question. So there are a number of tools, and they are typically implemented by consultants. They are, and some of them are members, like, there's a number of tools to actually measure that. They're quite scientific in terms of surveys, and it requires consultants on the ground, at least the ones that I'm aware of. I think one of the challenges that we have as social practitioners, that we haven't cracked that nut, frankly, in a way that is actually accessible for those organizations that don't have deep pockets. So I think there's a real need, at least not that I'm aware of. So we need to get to a point where the question that we keep talking about is, if -5, if you look at the scale from -5 to +5, and you say +5 is really socialized and we embrace you, and -5 is get out of town now, and 0 is we barely tolerate you, how do you measure where you sit on that spectrum, right? Because if I go to a site and I say to a general manager, how are you doing? Where on the spectrum do you sit? Do you sit on +4 or -1? They typically, there's an awfully long silence to say, well, we think we're doing okay, but we can't measure it. So I think there's a real need and an opportunity for anyone to basically provide us with to provide a simple enough tool to basically measure where you sit and how you can actually track that without going through lengthy perception surveys and things like that. So it's a really good question and not a good answer. But I think collectively we need to keep working on that.
Brilliant. And I think that's something there where if people do have answers to Julie's question, etc., please do add them into chat. Panelists, please do feel free to answer them in the Q&A as well. So hopefully that should help you out, Julie. But ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Luke and insight to FPIC. So thank you very much, Luke. Brilliant. Okay, so I promised a slight change of direction, and so we've spent a good few talks now really getting to grips with some of the really exciting challenges that we face perhaps on the more social side, but of course everything is integrated, so it permeates across the entirety of sustainability and ESG. And now I'm really excited to invite to our table, as it were, Laurie, and Laurie is going to talk to us about improved tailings management, which is a prerequisite for responsible metal supply. Now, if you've never come across this word called tailings before, don't worry. He is going to explain what on earth this thing means, because of course, tailings mean different things to different industries. So Laurie, without further ado, I'm going to pass across to yourself. If you want to introduce yourself to everybody first, and then get cracking with your talk. Thank you very much, Laurie.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm a minerals processing engineer, also known as a metallurgist. I started my career in Australia, working in copper, lead, zinc, silver mines in the 1990s. And after working in the mining industry for a number of years, I went to North America. I did my MBA, focused on sustainability, got into engineering consultancy, and now I have an independent consultancy focused on sustainability in mining called Resourceful Paths. And I'm talking to you from Vancouver. So firstly, what are tailings? Tailings are the fine material that's left over after the extraction of, after the extraction of valuable minerals and metals from ores in minerals processing or leaching. And often this is from a grinding process. We have a mixture of solids that are of a sand or silt texture and water. And so some example of processes here, we've got a flotation process that extracts the metals into a froth, and the tailings is what's left behind from these large tanks. We have a leaching process. This is a gold operation in Africa, leaching tanks, and the tailings go into this facility in the background. Here you've got tailings, for example, going out in pipes to the facility. And some of these impoundments can be very large, up to or over 1 billion tons of solids. So just as an example of quantities, here's an approximate example from copper. I've taken a significant copper mine in the United States, Bingham Canyon. That mine treats about 40 million tons per year of ore. And because the copper content's only a fraction of 1%, almost all of that ore ends up in this residual tailings stream. So we're producing from this mine 39 million tons of tailings. If you look at the world, all the copper from mined resources, most of that is processed through what we call concentrators to produce a concentrate for smelting. That's from sulfide ores. And out of that, again, most of the copper has less than 1% of copper in it. So almost all of the 2.7 or so billion tons of ore treated ends up in tailings. And if we look at future projections with increased copper supply, with decreasing ore grades, that's expected to increase. So it's a lot. And we've also got copper. Besides copper, we've got things like gold, iron ore tailings, lead, zinc, nickel, alumina, phosphate, many more. So a lot of material. It's a big issue. So this is a quote from Stephen Vick, who's an expert in tailings from a book in 1990. Fundamental to an understanding of the nature of tailings is a basic knowledge of how they are produced. So if we talk about the nature of tailings, we're generally talking about tailings particle size distribution, the water content, both the amount of water and also the chemistry of the water, and the mineral and chemical content of the particles. And these are affected firstly by geology. So what minerals and textures are present in the original ores, that affects the process flow sheet and affects all of these things, how we dewater and deposit the tailings, the water chemistry, and the interaction with surrounding materials. So we need to think about the whole system and what that means in terms of the materials and their risks. So there's been some high profile failures, especially two in Brazil, of iron ore facilities in Minas Gerais. So in 2015, the Samarco Fundão failure killed 19 people. It destroyed a town. It polluted more than 600 kilometers of the Rio Doce. Here's some photos of the town and also tailings getting into the Atlantic Ocean. So devastating incident. And then in 2019, the Brumadinho facility failed. Here's the dam after failure. It wiped out a mine cafeteria and killed a whole bunch of workers. 270 people died and infrastructure destroyed. So really devastating effects. But these are by no means the only events. There have been events over many years, various places, various commodities. Here's a few. So the Stava incident in Italy is a fluorite mine which destroyed a town and killed hundreds of people. We have Merrispruita gold mine in South Africa, which failed after rainfall and basically sent tailings into a local town and killed people. We have the Los Frailes lead zinc silver mine in Spain in 1998, which failed and devastated surrounding environmental national park. The Ajkai alumina facility in Hungary in 2010, where that failed and ran into a town and killed people. And then in Mount Polley here in British Columbia, a copper gold mine that failed and sent massive amounts of tailings into a local lake and deeply affected an Indigenous community there. So in response to these various failures, and in particular the Brumadinho failure in 2019, there was a push by investors to get more disclosure from industry and also get a defined standard on tailings. And this was basically co-convened by three groups: the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, the Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, and the International Council on Mining and Metals, ICMM. And those groups got together through 2019 and 2020, developed the standard with an independent review panel, and it was launched in August 2020. And the ICMM members, these major mining companies, they have committed to implement the standard for extreme and high risk facilities by 2023, and all other tailings facilities by 2025. It includes 6 elements. So it looks at affected communities, developing an integrated knowledge base, the design, construction, operation, and monitoring of tailings facilities, management and governance, emergency response and long-term recovery, and public disclosure and access to information. And you can read more about the standard at this site. So that's been an important development. I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies for safer tailings management. So a lot of focus is on safer embankments. And in industry, we talk about 3 broad types of tailings dams. We have upstream, centerline, or downstream, which relates to the types of materials and what supports the dam. So in centerline and downstream construction, you have a weight of stable materials in the embankment that holds back these tailings. This is an example, though, of upstream, where you've got the wall of the embankment going back and being essentially interacting with the finer tailings. And when a tailings failure occurs, all this embankment just collapses, as we saw in Brazil, for example. And these upstream dams are really unsuitable in seismically active regions such as Chile, and also in wet climates such as Brazil. They can be built safely in drier and stable regions such as Australia, but they're highly susceptible to the construction being consistent with the design intent and quality and so forth. So upstream is definitely a riskier type of construction. Limiting the water in the impoundments is also really important, because water often is what gives that tailings the ability to become fluid and to be released in devastating ways. So we talk about dewatering here. What happens in industry is we often use what we call sedimentation, or settling the tailings in thickeners such as these. We can have more robust, more sturdy thickeners like paste thickeners, and we can generate stuff that's more like a kind of a sour cream or toothpaste type of consistency, or we can go all the way to filtration and produce stackable tailings, a term that's called dry stacking, but I note it's not that dry. It's a cake that has some moisture in it. The costs of dewatering increase as we go to higher percent solids, but there are rehabilitation benefits and certainly lower risks. Now, what we can also do is look at ways to reduce the quantity of tailings in surface storage. So we can do this through pre-concentration, which is separating out lower grade particles from an ore stream before the grinding, so before the tailings are actually produced. We can also use tailings in beneficial ways, such as putting it back underground as backfill in certain mines, in underground mines, using some tailings materials for construction, or agricultural ameliorants. And this is an example of the Morro Agudo mine in Brazil, where the tailings are actually dewatered and recovered and sent to local farms because the carbonate content is beneficial for them. It's important to understand the characteristics of the tailings to make sure that they can meet these needs, but it is possible in some circumstances. And major mining companies such as BHP have put out challenges and prizes to investigate things like repurposing of copper tailings, and there's a number of teams that are working on this initiative around the world. So I think there's some hope in these areas, but it can be economically challenging. I've got a concept here of how a mine might significantly be able to reduce its impact from tailings. This is an example. If we focus on underground mining, often there's possibilities of placing tailings back underground, including things like pre-concentration, and then with the processing, segregating out the most chemically reactive portions of tailings, such as the sulfides, and putting them, for example, back underground in a paste backfill. And that limits the amount of surface tailings disposal. We can look at dewatering, such as using thickeners or paste thickeners or filtration, and then recovering the water and recycling it. And that reduces the impact both in terms of water consumption and reduces the footprint. So often underground mining is a great way. If you can't do underground mining though, there are still ways that we can do processing in ways to reduce the risks of tailings facilities. I just want to talk briefly also about the GMPA, the Global Mineral Professionals Alliance. It's a global collaboration between peak member associations for minerals professionals. And we have an initiative called the Global Action on Tailings. We're currently leading that initiative with a number of colleagues from around the world. Our members of the member associations, we have ethical obligations to protect the safety and health of the public and the environment. And we're not an industry body. Some of our members, most of our members work with industry, but we do have relevant technical expertise and some degree of independence. And we're hoping through things like content sharing, building trust with external groups, and addressing the skill shortage in tailings professionals to help move towards more improved tailings management and reducing the risks associated with tailings. So on this note, just happy to take any questions, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laurie. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for a fantastic presentation just now by Laurie. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, sir. So on this, I mean, this is something where, and as you showed, there have been some absolutely horrific disasters when it comes to those catastrophic failure of tailings dams. And it's not like Brumadinho was the first one or San Marco was the first one, exactly as you showed. So it's taken us a long while to almost learn our lesson and have initiatives such as the Global Tailings Review, etc., come through. Do you think that we are now on that tipping point of really making a difference, or do you think there's more oomph that's needed for us to actually do what's needed in terms of tailings?
Personally, I think there's more oomph needed. I think there's been some huge steps, and I think ICMM, through its commitment to the standard and through the development of supporting good practice guides, conformance documents, and so forth, I think the larger mining companies now are in a pretty good place. But a tailings failure anywhere in the mining industry really taints the entire industry. And I think there's a lot of smaller mining companies that they don't have the skills or the resources to do some things properly. I think the awareness of tailings risks and the need to manage them, that's understood, but there's a lot of legacy facilities that still are at risk. We've got climate change and increasing climate variability that makes the risk of failures due to, for example, storm events, floods and so forth, still present. I think there's still a lot more work to do. We're really probably most concerned about the skill shortage because with these events, with challenges with insurance, you've got consultants who I guess have had their reputations damaged because they've somehow either wittingly or unwittingly be involved in failures. That's very damaging for them professionally. There's still a lot of challenges, and we've got to lift the bar in terms of the broader understanding of tailings and tailings risks and how to really get, I think, through the supply chain, the pressure for all the mining industry to responsibly manage tailings, more public disclosure and transparency, and to basically allow the companies to spend the money they need to do things right.
So that's a really good point that you made there. So allowing those mining companies to spend the money that they need to in order to make this right. So where does that money come from, Laurie?
Look, I think the investment community clearly has a role to play here, because if it rewards companies that have good practice, for example, with cheaper finance, with the expectations of doing things properly, that when studies are done, for example, that the approval for lending money is only given if standards are appropriate, for example. I think regulators clearly have a role to play here to make sure that the regulatory regimes all around the world are to a sufficient standard and appropriate for the context. I think those things all help. But it's really up to industry to be moving in the right direction and not trying to kind of make excuses on why they can't afford to manage tailings risks properly. Otherwise, the industry is really in trouble and it won't be trusted.
Thanks for that, Laurie. And I think so. I mean, I think that really goes to the point of what we're hearing throughout this conference is actually it needs everybody to be pulling together. It can't just be this is what the tailings dam specialists really need and doing that in isolation. It needs everything else to come to that as well. Now, there are a number of questions, some brilliant questions coming in on the Q&A. So maybe you can take a look at them after we finish just now. But there's one that comes in from John Clark and he says, and I think you know that this one's coming at you. So with the global tailings dam review, there was no real comment on upstream methods as being very high risk. Or that seemed to, or the oomph behind that seemed to be missing. Do you have any comments on that?
Look, there's a really good book written by Deanna Kemp and Andrew Hopkins that talks about the tailings standard, how it was put together, the interaction between the co-conveners, the influence of industry, and in particular ICMM. I recommend that people read that book. I might just put a link of that into the chat, Sarah. On upstream dams, there's very strong resistance from industry to ban upstream dams universally. And industry really opposes command and control type of directives about practices. But the reality is in some parts of the world, like especially places like Chile, Peru, Brazil, etc., it is extremely difficult, almost impossible to build upstream dams safely because you can't trust that the operators over time will do things right, or there might be knowledge gaps. People may not sort of appreciate the risks or dealing with extreme events well enough. In places like Australia, it's still very commonly practiced, and I think the industry is really strongly opposed to just a universal ban. But I think what mining companies need to do is they need to scrutinise that method much more strongly and only really use it when it's absolutely safe to do. And there's some tailings that have properties that drain very easily, for example, or it can be done safely. But it's just not worth taking the risk. And if industry pushes too hard to continue to be able to use certain practices that end up causing problems, then they may be forced to not practice things in certain ways. It's like, for example, cyanide. Cyanide is being managed by the gold industry now. Had it not managed things through the International Cyanide Code, for example, maybe cyanide would be banned in even more parts of the world, for example. So upstream, it is controversial. In many parts of the world, it's appropriate to ban. Industry will resist. We got to hold them to account, but it can be done safely in some places.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Laurie. And please do post that link into the chat. Just a health warning on it, though. It is an absolute nightmare to try and download the book, but keep pestering the publisher.
Yes.
And eventually,
I agree.
Eventually they will give you a link that will hopefully work for you. So do pester the publisher, or at least maybe we should all motivate for all of us to be able to see that book via another method, because it's well worth the read. But brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Laurie. A massive round of applause and thank you for that insight to tailings dams. Brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah.
Fantastic. Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now change direction a little bit again, and I'm going to welcome a number of people to our little platform that we have here. So we have the wonderful Catherine McCallum, Daniela Serra, Jocelyn Fraser, and John Russell. Yes, John loves us so much. He's back again. You may recognise him from this morning's session. If you missed his morning session, it is well worth a look on the YouTube video, etc. And I think we've actually already managed to edit our videos from this morning, so they will be up live imminently. But Catherine, I'm going to pass across to you guys to introduce yourselves and run this session, because you know what's about to happen and I don't. So Catherine, over to yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. And I am going to swiftly pass along to John, I think, because he is the man with the questions today, and we're just here to help. So John, to you.
Thanks, everyone. Hello again. For those of you that were there this morning, beard's got a bit longer since then. But right, so this session it's a double billing. This one, so we're on for a bit longer, but we've got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a exploration manager for a junior exploration company. It's the type of company that I deal with every day through my work with SRK. So I know the sort of challenges that they have and the sort of places they work in. And I know the sort of challenges they're having grappling with big changes in the industry. So I'm going to take this opportunity as my being a hypothetical exploration manager to ask 3 experts some really tough questions that I'm grappling with. So I've got 3 doctors here: Dr. Catherine McCallan, who of Cezanne Associates here in Wales, where I am as well. So Catherine and I have been working very closely over the last few years on the social aspects of mineral exploration. I've got Dr. Danielle Sierra in Chile, who is an independent consultant. She specializes in responsible mining and indigenous people's rights. Great to have you here, Danny. And Dr. Jocelyn Fraser in Vancouver. And again, Jocelyn and Catherine and I have been doing some work recently on well, picking up on Jocelyn's expertise, which is changes to mining business models and creation of shared value in mining. So I can't think of 3 better people to help me out understand a bit more about how my exploration company needs to change. So yeah, I'll fire away. I've got a load of questions for these guys. Please do put questions in the chat as well. Hopefully Rose and Sarah can keep an eye on those for us. But yeah, I mean, I'm coming at this from the point of view, as I said, of an exploration manager who's got a small team, a limited budget. I'm trying to maximize value out of my my exploration projects, and there's all this chatter and noise about ESG in the background, which on top of everything else, I'm really struggling to keep on top of and to understand. I know I should be doing something, and I'm not doing it yet, so I think I need to get up to speed pretty quickly. So yeah, this all this talk about ESG and how mining's not doing well enough, this discussion that is changing or developing incredibly quickly, and I'm constantly playing catch up. So guys, Catherine, what do you think my priorities are, so I can put things or people in place to improve the performance of my exploration company and my team in this regard?
I would say your first priority would be to take a step back and look and have a few discussions with your team. And first of all, identify what you believe you are doing well. What are your strengths? What are your capabilities? What's good? And once you've identified those, then focus on, okay, so this is what we're doing really well. What are we not doing quite so well? And then how could that be changed, building on what we are doing well? It all sounds a little bit abstract, but I really think that focusing on the strengths and focusing on your assets and what you're good at from the beginning will enable you then to identify sort of, I think, practicable solutions for dealing with your problems. So, for example, from a social perspective, you may have something within your internal workings that you are doing well, but you've got problems with the community. And so it's a case of then looking at, okay, so how are we managing this internally? And then why are we not then able to translate a similar sort of relationship to the community? Is it how we communicate? Is it how we communicate internally with each other? Is it how we communicate with the community? So, I mean, it's very abstract because the example is abstract, but I would say very much take a step back, take stock, look at what you're doing well first, and then look at then how that plays out across the wider field.
It's really difficult though, because I've got my shareholders are just hounding me for results. So I've got to deliver on this. It's hard to take a step back and not think that I'm losing value all the time. What about you, Jocelyn? Have you got any ideas as to what I should be doing at the moment?
Well, I think Catherine's onto something with looking at your strengths. I think sometimes the whole area of ESG performance, reporting, monitoring, and evaluation can be really overwhelming. So starting from a place of strength is a great idea. There are so many amazing resources. We've heard great talks here today and yesterday. been putting all kinds of tools and resources into the chat box. So that's the advantage of those free resources and advice. And I would say, look outside the mining industry. We see really fantastic examples of good ESG performance is sometimes not within our own sector. So that's a great place for some additional ideas, things that could be transferred over. I think subscribe to news aggregator sites on ESG performance. I'm here, as you mentioned, in North America. So sites like GreenBiz, GlobeScan, Knights, the Smart Prosperity Institute. Lots of great ideas about how you can ESG performance. And then I think you just need to be brave to have difficult conversations. You know, from your executive and your board, you know, to use that money to put another drill hole in, not to build a community engagement program. There needs to be a discussion inside your companies about that. So that's just a few ideas.
That's great, Jocelyn. Thanks. And yeah, leading on from that and what I said earlier about my my pesky shareholders, my brief really is to return value to them. And yet what I'm hearing is that I need to put the best interest of host communities first, or at least equal with that. None of the other companies in this area that I'm working in are doing the same thing. And I feel that I'm going to lose an edge. Do you think that these days, if I really try to reprioritize my activities towards community initiatives, I could get an edge over the other companies here?
I think you could, and more importantly than what I think is the fact that, you know, participating in conferences like PDAC and Indaba and some of the other big mining shows, one of the things that I've consistently heard over the last couple of years is that as the large companies sort of abdicate responsibility for exploration to companies like yours and other small juniors, one of the things that they do when they consider their acquisition targets is to screen those projects through the lens of social performance. So when they do diligence, it's not just looking at the drill result, it's looking at your social performance, this idea of a social license to operate. And those companies that can demonstrate that they have good working relationships, and that doesn't mean no conflict. Sometimes some can be an indicator of a robust conversation, enough trust to bring forward problems. But companies can demonstrate that they have de-risked their project from a social perspective, they are finding a higher valuation acquisition. So
that's really good news. Yeah, that's going to make it a much easier sell to my my board. So thanks for that. That's and turning to you, Danny. This is as I said earlier, I'm pretty overwhelmed by all of this, and I feel like I'm using a lot of time when I need to keep those rigs turning, and I need to keep my field teams happy. I need some help. So what sort of people could I bring in to help me with this sort of thing in the field? I need people on the ground talking to local people in the best way possible, training up my geologists. Are there people around that can help me do this sort of thing? And that's my first question. My second point is that I've heard that there's a lot of free advice available in this sort of area, which is great. I never get free advice for my my geological work. Are you guys underselling yourselves?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, first of all, if you kind of know that you and your team, you don't feel comfortable about interacting with the community before going to the field, it's better to search for some advice. And there is a lot of, I mean, ways on the internet, training courses. I mean, we are going to participate also in the end of the year in a postgraduate diploma that is only going to last 4 months. But there is a lot of from universities, NGOs offering different kind of tools and advices that will be good to search for them. And that's why if you start from the point that you feel like that you don't have a strong strength on working or interacting with the community, that is a big, I mean, a big step forward, because some people don't even know that they're not prepared of of relating with the community, and because you are going to be the first people from the company being there, the first impression that they will get from the company will be you and your team. So it's key what is going to be the first impression that you are going to give to them. So in the meantime, if you have to go to the field and you still don't have the maybe the knowledge of how to do it or what to do or not to do, I will advise you to first of all be transparent. I mean, you don't need to give to the community all the information, but if they ask you, give the right information, not hide from them what you are doing there.
So I need to make sure that
because
I need to make sure that
honest and transparent.
So it's really important. It's really important, by the sounds of things, that I need to make sure that my team of young geologists all have the same message to tell to people that they're meeting the field. Yeah.
Yes, and then and that is a message that is true, is the truth, but you don't need to give a lot of detail to confuse the people or so. But you need to start to talk to the people, not to hide from the people, because it sometimes happens that geologists don't feel, or young people, I don't know how to interact, so I better hide from them and try to not to talk to them. And if they ask me something, I better not to say anything. No, be prepared and be honest, be transparent at first place as much as you can, but that doesn't mean that you need to already tell them everything about the project. But to be honest and transparent will be the first step if you don't really know more how to behave.
That's really good advice, and I could see how it would help to build trust if my whole team is just simply clear and honest.
Build trust. Yes.
Talking of trust and social license, you mentioned social license earlier. The board of my company have really bought into this idea of social license to operate. I'm not really sure that they know what it means though. They keep telling me to get an SLO. All right, how will I know when I've got one? What sort of things do I look for?
I think you always know when you don't have one. I think that is for sure. What is an SLO? I mean, SLO is an informal acceptance of your project. So, when people are at the gates and they're complaining, it's gone. I think it comes back to sort of my first point, sort of, it is about the engagement. It is about the respect. It is about the transparency. I mean, we've heard lots of people, as Jocelyn said earlier, sort of talk about this afternoon. It is about how you communicate with and how you engage with people first and foremost. Someone told me once, you'd always regard everybody as being the intelligent uninformed. Just because people don't have the knowledge, it doesn't mean they're stupid. And one of the mistakes that I have seen again and again and again is people assuming stupidity and or confusing sort of stupidity with lack of education, which is a very good way to lose your social license. I think also in slightly different sort of to Luke, I don't think people are predictable. And I think if people were, I don't think social license would be the number one risk right now sort of to the sector. I think it is the fact that there is not as queer as folk, as we say in the UK, people are unpredictable, how they behave, they change their minds, they change where they live, they change everything. And I think this is why a lot of geologists and geoengineers and geoscientists in general sort of tend to have issues with the social dimension, because it isn't quantitative. It's not like a lot of the environmental issues, which are quantitative. It is qualitative. It is in a constant state of flux. So in terms of how do you know if you've got your SLO, I think you know when you haven't got it. And I think if you put systems in place that ensure that there is an opportunity for dialogue, for deliberative dialogue, that there is an opportunity for effective communication, that, you know, if people have a complaint, there is a process there for a complaint to be managed that is open, transparent, and is accessible. I think you have these, and these are not costly sort of mechanisms. These are very cost-effective mechanisms.
That's good to know.
But what these do, they provide you with your social insurance, and your social insurance then enables you to sort of to work towards achieving a social license. And I think also just one other little bit in that is the fact that quite often you'll see social license gets lost sort of during or just after the mergers and acquisition processes. You know, a mine can change ownership 10 times between development and operation. And unfortunately, for the most part, the commitments that are made get lost along the way. And this then results in sort of people remembering what was promised to them, but the new owner having no idea because there's been no record kept of it. So that record keeping as well, just those systems in place enable you to put the building blocks in place for a social license.
So I think you touched on something there that I also wanted to ask about, which was to do with you know, making promises and delivering benefits to communities and things as well. There's a term that I hear used quite a lot these days, which is shared value. I need to create shared value. So can you tell me a bit more about what that means, and how do I know, how do I find out what is valuable to this community, or what can I do?
So I'll jump in to take that one, since I'm the one who used to be constantly on the shared value soapbox. So I would define shared value as an economic strategy. So that's not to discount the importance of social, cultural, and emotional value. But when we talk about creating shared value in an economic sense, we're talking about expanding the total pool of money that's available, the financial assets or resources that are available. So it's not just about redistributing the wealth that's already been created through taxes, royalty, and wages. It's about looking for new points of opportunity to contribute to what Liz Friel and Rachel Drucker talked about, resilience. So how do we get there? Well, the first step is to look for points of intersection between what your company needs to be successful and what communities need for their own long-term sustainable development. We had a fantastic presentation earlier this morning from Maria Angelo talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. There's an amazing place to look for some points of intersection. Almost all of the topics of the SDGs represent something that mining needs. SDG 6, it's water. Anybody running a mining company is going to have a need for water. Communities obviously need water. That's a point of intersection. SDG number 7, clean energy. Opening your conversation about how you could build a collaborative partnership with the communities, with your suppliers, and with the mining company to advance progress on these shared goals. Then you're on the path to creating shared value. And it's a great complement to philanthropy and social responsibility, but it really does deliver something quite significantly different.
Yeah. I think also building on that, Jocelyn, there's actually the regional development priorities as well, understanding sort of, you know, I'm sure everybody sort of in this group have been involved in projects where the mine manager has always wanted sort of to drive one sort of project, or saw a project work in Indonesia, so they want to make it work in the Gobi Desert, and that's their pet project, or you have a sort of they want to set up a tailoring to make the uniforms, and they want to do this and that, and end up creating sort of linkages plans and businesses that are very, very much sort of I suppose building dependency on the mine, as opposed to looking at what are the development priorities, and again coming back to looking at the strengths of the community and the assets in the community. And I think it's that it creates shared value, creates an opportunity to really to build on the values of the community,
absolutely,
and their understandings,
and the values of the company, and finding that common place that can then be supported. And I think
you can really play to the strengths, so
absolutely.
that everything from their area of expertise and development.
Yeah.
You get resilience much better.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's great. I mean, I've got several projects actually in various different parts of the country that I operate in. So shared value in one place might be something completely different in the other place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Danny, we mentioned social license, but I want to talk a bit about actual licenses, formal permissions for me to do my exploration. There's a really strict mineral law in the country that I work in. My company is completely compliant with all of that. So from the government's permission, I've got all the permissions I could ever need to go and do my work. And yet I'm still really struggling with people accepting us to come and do our work and allowing us into certain areas, even though that I've got all the paperwork I need. I've got all the permissions from the government I need. It's the local communities that are really pushing back against us. So considering that the government has given me all of these permissions, I feel that the government should have my back a little bit and support me in this, and stand up for my rights as someone who's fully compliant with the exploration laws. What do you think about that? Should I just charge in anyway, saying that the government has given me permission to, or is that going to cause me big problems?
No, that's going to cost you big problems in the future. And something to keep in mind, like even though in the countries the law is maybe going below of what is needed to accomplish or to performance regarding social issues in the mining industry. Nowadays, I don't know if you have seen the report of the London Stock and Exchange. They already have set up that every new business that gets into the London Stock Exchange has to go through a really sound due diligence process. So now international standards are going very up, and many and maybe the countries are going below that regarding the environmental or social legislation. But internationally now, every company will have to raise them a little, way more. So that is getting, and I'm sure that will happen maybe soon in the stock exchange in Canada and other countries, because it's a tendency that is happening. So, and yes, as you are answering, your question, if you don't do it right and you don't approach to the community in the right way, and with and you don't establish a good relationship, that will cost you more money. And maybe the shareholders don't realize that in the beginning, but in the end they will blame you or any other team that was before. Why you didn't tell us that this was going to happen? So maybe you don't think that is your duty to, but in the end, when they find out that they will have social environmental conflicts that the project will be halted, then they will look back and they will see, well, who didn't do their job in the right way, and then they probably will blame the teams that were before. So I think that is a good strategy if you have a vision into the future, by knowing about that these things. Social license to operate is one of the first risk in the business now. If you see Ernst & Young ranking that they do every year, you will see it's the first risk in the business. So maybe the investors or the shareholders, they don't realize that, but maybe you have to, even though it's not your duty, you have to point that out. I think so.
Yeah.
To make them to know that it's important. So to keep in mind from the very beginning.
So it sounds like
So,
if it sounds like it's interesting because you mentioned the stock exchanges, because my junior company is planning to go for a listing when we get some good exploration results, and we hadn't really thought about what value a good grounding in ESG could do for us. But it sounds like we really need to start investing on that, even though the Mineral Act in the country that we work in doesn't really need us to. So that's it. Again, that's some really good advice. Anything that reduces my risk and increases the company's value is really good to know about. So it sounds like there's some big changes going on, which we need to. We're playing catch up here. We need to start moving very quickly. So in making those changes in our company. So I'd like to ask each of you very.
Sorry, I was going to say something. Yeah, sorry, that before I was going to say something about social license to operate, following what Catherine said before.
Yeah.
That also it could take you years and years to build trust and to gain social license to operate, but you have to keep in mind that you can lose it in one day. In one day. So that's why what Catherine was saying, you have to keep monitoring and keep an ongoing relationship from the exploration until the very end, because it's not some social license to operate. It's not something that you gain, and once you get it, you have it for good. No, you can lose it in one day. One day. So that's why it's something that you have to keep in mind, and that's why it's more difficult than maybe to deal with environmental issues. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks. So it sounds like I need to start really early as well. Yeah, I've heard about this decision tree, exploration decision tree. That sounds useful for guidance. So yeah, just to running out of time, got to get back to my drill rigs. So very quickly, each of you, what do you think needs to change to deliver on this ESG agenda that we see today? Very short answers, starting with Jocelyn.
There's so many things, but let me focus on 3 things, and I'm going to give a what and a how. So first of all, I think we need to see a mindset change where we need to move from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. Some of us have talked about. How are we going to get there? I think we need green swans and donuts. So green swans, a book by John Elkington, and donuts, Kate Rayworth's amazing book on how to think like a century economist. Second, we need to change the business model of mining. It hasn't changed for decades, and society has changed a lot during that time. I think we need to build a business case based on value protection, value capture, and value generation, not just financial, but also social. And the third thing I think is we need to move from engagement, stakeholder engagement, community engagement, towards collaboration. You know, we're looking to try and drive progress on big problems. They're too big for any single entity to drive by their own. We need collaborative partnerships with communities of interest and mining companies so that we can create shared value and deliver the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Wow, great answers. You have to email those to me. Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
I think sort of building on really sort of what Jocelyn's been saying, and I think starting with the whole notion of collaboration, I think dialogue is a term that's starting to be used in the mining sector, but I would say that it needs to go one step further. Dialogue needs to be deliberative, that conversation needs to be there, and there needs to be a focus on different perspectives. Thinking needs to be critical, decisions need to be informed from a range of different perspectives, not just the bankability of a project, or the bankability of a project needs to also be more informed by the wider context. I think it should be okay to say stop and no, and to realise that a project cannot proceed. There are a number of projects going on at the moment, especially in Europe, which perhaps should not be proceeding because of where they are in areas of outstanding natural beauty or World Heritage sites. You know, that notion of something, the mineral being more valuable than the cultural or environmental value of the area. You know, I think there is a case, and I think it's wrong to sort of cloak all that in NIMBYism. I think World Heritage sites are World Heritage sites for a reason. I'm sure there are a few sort of people within Rio Tinto who wish they'd paid more cognizance for the notion of something being a World Heritage site than they had, even though they had all their licenses and permissions. You know, should they have done what they did? Should they have just thought no? And I think to have the strength to say and to say no, whether you're a junior or a major company. And I think then finally, I suppose my final one would be acknowledgement that informal acceptance from the outset is as important as formal permissions. Obligations that are made, building on that, should stay with the project and not stay with the owner of the mining company who said it. If an obligation is made, it should belong to the project, and there should be some process or mechanism put in place that enables that as a compact or a contract to belong to that mineral resource, and it becomes a legacy issue. I think that would
Thanks, Catherine. That's God, getting some really good stuff here. Finally, Danny, what do you think?
Short. Yeah.
Very short.
Very short. I know we're running out of time. Yeah. No. Go. Sorry.
What do you think what would be the biggest changes you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, I would like to change the focus, not only to give more participation to the people, but to focus that participation in providing more decision making. I mean, and that will to allow that you will need to change I would say the culture of fear that companies have because they think that they give decision making or power or voice or are more transparent with the communities. They will lose strain, or they won't be able to do what they want to do, and I think that they are very wrong. But because they haven't worked with communities and they don't know how you can build a better relationship with them. So I would say to change that culture of fear and try to provide to the community some decision making as much as they can. And that will be key to build a good relationship with them, I think. And the other thing is that hopefully geologists, engineers, geoscience, people that work in the mining industry, if you could request or company will provide to you more training courses, maybe it could be very short ones. They are not very expensive. Sometimes there are free ones even. But give you the time to train you on those issues. Even I remember a geologist in a conference a few years ago, he was suggested that at the universities, geologists should have at least one subject about social issues in the mining industry. And that is not happening, not really. I mean,
that would be really useful.
Yeah, so I would say if you could, as a group, start to push for getting more kind of formal information about it, requesting that will be also a step forward. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Danny. That's great. I'd love to train my team of geologists up in this sort of thing. So any help going would be great. So I think I've got to get back, as I said, to my drill rigs now. There might be some other questions that have come in from elsewhere whilst we've been talking, though. But in the meantime, thank you very much, the three of you. That's given me some really good advice and some good ideas to make some changes in my company. And sounds like my board will be pleased if I can deliver some value for using those changes as well. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, John, Jocelyn, Danny, and Catherine. John, I'm going to now just come in the last 2 minutes. So I'm your boss.
Oh no!
Okay, so you've now got back to that evil corporate center, and I'm your boss, and we've bumped into one another in the lift. We're heading out of the building. Okay, so you've got 60 seconds to tell me what it is we need to do to get all of this social stuff fixed. What do you say?
All right, boss. Well, first job is we need to hear from you. I need to hear from the board what your company's plan is, what our company's plan is, so I can really be honest with the people that are in the community where we're working, and outline, map out the future for them. And so I need to know from the board what your objectives are with this project. And then I need to be able to tell my team of geologists who are out in the field what that plan is, and I need them to understand why we're working in the ways that we do, and I need them to be able to deliver messages clearly as well, because you're reliant on us at the moment in terms of spreading your company's message. So I want you to invest in some training for my team, and we'll get these guys over from Canada and Chile and Wales, and they can come and train us up, and we'll end up with a much more I think it will really improve the relationship that we have with the community.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, John. As you know, that social and purpose and values are heart of our company. So, of course, get on with it, says the boss. Brilliant. So, ladies and gentlemen, I should say as well that John didn't know that I was about to ask him that. So well done, John, for creating an elevator pitch so swiftly.
I will also say that I've been a hypothetical exploration manager during this time. Some of the questions that have been coming in seem to have some genuine sympathy attached to them. So.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much, John, Danny, Jocelyn, and Catherine. Another fantastic round of applause to all of you guys. That was brilliant. So just to round off with the end of our second day, but our third session in terms of our Responsible Raw Materials annual conference, taking a look at the ESG toolbox. So how do we make ESG a reality? I'm going to invite all of our speakers who we've got left with us to turn on their cameras, but especially the fantastic Rich Lloyd. So Rich is joining us. So talking about bosses, Rich is CEO of his own company. So Rich, if you want to turn on your video and your turn off your mute button now. And I'm hoping he's still there. I know he's been hugely busy today. Rich started out life as a geologist. So he's worked down gold mines, etc., you name it. But he's also worked on the banking side. He's worked on the insurance side. And the last time that Rich and I saw one another properly was actually working together on a mine site in Australia. Rich, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody, and especially what it is that you're up to now, and how you're making sure that ESG is incorporated into everything you guys are doing?
Yeah, sure. I'd like Liz Friel's comment. Actually, the Colorado School of Mines has introduced the social science sort of modules, etc., which is something we didn't do at RSM, certainly when I studied, but it was a long time ago. Look, I'm a mining geologist by training. I spent most of my life involved in gold mining, whether it be actually doing it, and then for 25 years in investment banking, lending money at a project finance level, doing the corporate finance M&A side of things, etc. And then latterly helped Sarah at Satala on some of the, and I learned a hell of a lot working with Satala. One of those cases when you think you know it all and then you realize you don't by any stretch of the imagination. What we run now is a bunch of us realized that there is a huge gap, not only an investment gap, but a knowledge gap between the sort of friends and family and early stage rounds. John, this probably attests to your path you're about to go on with your listing in your company to what we used to call grown-up financing with PE funds, banks, etc. That gap is widening. So we developed an investment platform called NR Private Market. I run a company called Monexia, which owns that 100%. And it allows for earlier stage exploration projects, development projects, etc., and even larger companies with individual projects they want to get financed to get those get the private investors involved in the financing, and importantly, adhere to the ESGs and the license, the social license to operate, etc., in order to be prepared for credit committee at Orion Mine Finance, RCF, Standard Bank, Dresdner, whoever. They've lived and breathed that process then for a couple of years with us, and investors on our platform will only be investing in companies that adhere to that, and we will only be selecting companies that go on our platform that adhere to that. If they don't, we'll point them in the right direction and help them, but at least they know where they're going. So that's kind of where we're at. We've done about 15 deals now. The biggest deal we've done is £1 million. The smallest is about 200,000. It's all helpful for these projects. And importantly, we're seeing that, you won't get through Orion Mine Finance Credit Committee without a full-blown ESG gap analysis or paper and proof that you can do it. Robin Weisbeck sits on the board. She wrote the IFC 8 principles. So forget it. You're not going to get past her if you haven't thought of this early on in your process. That's about it, Sarah, for now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rich. And do you see that there's been a big change over the last 12 months in terms of actually people taking all of this seriously or coming to the table rather than just seeing it as a tick box requirement?
Yeah, it's gone from, when I graduated in the early 90s, it's gone from lip service, social responsibility was, providing some money to dig a well, and that was about it, and buying people's land. It's gone from that to tick boxing, which was both at the boardroom level. I sit on a bunch of boards now, and you just wouldn't be able to do what they did years ago, to actually doing it. And people not, individual investors are not prepared to invest in your company if you don't do it right. And there are projects in tricky jurisdictions, and there's two examples at the moment. I don't know the finer details, but the Kyrgyz Republic and Armenia is not the easiest place to work. One company slipped up. They really have upset the new government and got a massive fine. And another company that I know quite well have done it brilliantly and very, very well from day one. Relationships at the top level, relationships locally, and they do it very, very well locally.
Great, thanks for that, Rich. So I'm gonna ask you a question that I'm then going to go around our room, and we seem to have a huge panel this afternoon because we had so many fabulous speakers, which is great. And the question is this, and it actually comes from, so Janice, one of our attendees, posed this a couple of hours ago actually, and she said, okay, so we're asking all these questions, but what questions are we not asking that we should be asking? So Rich, I know I'm pinging this onto you, and after Rich I'm going to go to Liz Friel. So Rich, what do you reckon? What are the questions that we're not asking?
You rep and warrant in a loan document, and even when you're doing your pitches, that I sign up to the Anti-Bribery and Corruption Act and all the rest of it. Now, for anyone that's worked, John, you're running a project there. It's so hard not to fall foul of that. Yeah, we were bringing 777 trucks into Malaysia. Every single policeman put a roadblock and needed, a little bit of backshee to get the damn things through. I mean, they're 350-ton trucks. They're bright yellow. They're a bit obvious. And that is at the low. But if it happens at the lowest level or it happens at the highest level, it will filter down around and everywhere. One company next to us got on very, very quickly with the projects and the licenses, but it was a never-ending string of paper, brown paper bags. The proof on whether a company is whiter than white and has never entertained that is not asked actually. Everyone says yes, oh no, we've never done that. Oh no, and we adhere to that. How much digging is done? Don't know. Are we still blind to that? I don't know.
Cool. Thank you very much for that, Rich. Great answer. Liz, I'm going to come to you next, and then I'm going to go to Ben.
Okay, one of the questions that comes to mind that I don't think people are asking, and it speaks a bit to something that a few panelists sort of alluded to and spoke around the edges of today, myself included, and that's it's clear that there is a big change needed in the business model approach and the lens that we take to doing mining activities, mineral development activities. And the question that I don't see asked a lot is, what are those new business models? Who's trying them? What can we learn? How can we collaborate? Surely there are pilots going on or folks trying. And I think that's a really interesting question to ask, because there's still far too much of, ostriches with their heads in the sand, kind of in denial that this massive change needs to happen. So I think that's a really interesting question. I'd love to hear answers too.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Liz. Ben, let's come to yourself and then we'll go to Jocelyn.
Okay, I'm going to drop the bomb. Why are we mining so much gold in the world?
Question, Ben. Fantastic.
Where's it go? It sits in a bank in Switzerland. Why are we doing it?
You know my question.
Nice one, Ben. Okay, so Ben gets that you get lots of marks for that particular question. Ladies and gentlemen, we can award them all a number of stars depending on how good we think their questions are. No pressure at all. Jocelyn, let's come to yourself next, and then we'll go to Laurie.
I think we need to be asking questions about something that's also been alluded to. This idea of what Peter Bradshaw at UBC here has called a social chain of custody. So why are companies not planning for a social chain of custody? We know the ownership changes many times from the time of discovery through to closure, and yet there's no planning on this social chain of custody and the transference of commitments and obligations. So why aren't we talking about social chain of custody?
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Jocelyn. Brilliant. Laurie, let's come to yourself next, and then we'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sarah. Look, I think we've got some questions around professionals. How can we better support young professionals to basically pick up the knowledge that they need and to be courageous enough to call out more senior people when things are not kind of going in the right direction? I think as we get older, as we kind of get beaten into submission in terms of the realities of working with major mining companies in our current sort of systems and constraints, and we can't afford this or it's too hard to do that. I just wonder if perhaps we need to sort of move back from that and take in some different perspectives from younger people who maybe could think of different ways to approach these things.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Laurie. That's fantastic. Rachel, let's come to your lovely self and then we'll go to Peter.
Thanks. So my question, I guess we're talking a lot about how to do things better, right? Like how to do better engagement, social investment, social performance. And the other side of that is the communities that are part of this. And I guess my question is around the pressure that we're putting on communities. If everybody were to do this really well as a company, that requires a lot from communities to be able to engage appropriately, to be able to involve, to be able to respond, and all these pieces. So my question is around how to support communities in being able to even handle all of what we would ideally be doing.
Fantastic. Yeah, how on earth do you handle it? Brilliant. Peter, let's come to yourself and then we'll go to Danny. Oh, I'm going to have to do the word that begins with an M. There we go.
Mute, yeah. So three things actually come to mind. One is, I think, the Rio Tinto Caves incident is, and this gets to Liz's point about business models, illustrates actually that the risk management command control model of mining companies takes away individual decision-making and responsibility at a mine level. And what happens was actually Rio did have all the things in place, but it was so rigid it didn't allow anything to happen at the face when they're going, hold on, that's not right, because there was no latitude. So I think they've actually over-engineered themselves. So that's one. So that's a business operating model inside them. I think mining companies are totally, there's only a couple of mining companies, Anglo, Rio, because of their diamond business and aluminium businesses that actually truly engage with the end users of metals, car companies, etc. Most of them are just, actually, and somebody said they're actually miners, not producers of metals and minerals, right? So that's a big difference. So I think they've got to engage more with the end of the value chain to understand what it is they need, because I don't think they do. There's no understanding. And like I said, communities, Indigenous people, so we have Matthew Kuhn Kamanabod, who's the former Grand Chief of the Cree Nation, and he said, we want participation, not consultation. Consultation is actually insulting to Indigenous people. So that's a model that's, pre and prior consent, that's all out the window. They need to be participating, and they don't want to sit at the table, they want a voice at the table and be heard. So I think those are kind of three buckets that I see as important areas and questions to be posed. So which is what I assume you were asking for, Sarah, as I jump in.
No, that's brilliant. So fantastic questions that you've given us there. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. Danny, let's come to your lovely self next, and then we'll go to Luke.
Yes, for me, maybe a question that we haven't done, or that I have kind of more like a challenge, is I would like this kind of communities that we build through these kind of events or conferences. I would like to, how we can join forces to make countries, especially developing countries, to reinforce their social legislation regarding the performance of the mining industry. Because it's clear after all the talks that we have today that they need to be raised, and that they are going behind environmental legislation, but that they are as important as environmental legislation. So how can we put those things even? And how, as a community, a technical community, we could try to, I don't know, create reports or provide information to governments, or to help to push in the direction of moving things forward to raise social standards. So I would like to, because otherwise whose duty is? The companies or communities like these ones that we're building here, sharing this time together, who is going to do it? Or international organizations, who has to try to keep pushing things up a little bit, the standards up, social standards up. So because it's clear that if social legislation goes at the same time and is as compulsory as environmental legislation, companies will align to that. But that is still going slowly and a little back. So we still have a long way to go. So it's more like a challenge, an invitation to how these kind of groups could try to build maybe some sort of intent to help moving in that direction. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much for that, Danny. So setting a challenge there for all of us, which is brilliant. Thank you for that. Luke, let's come to your lovely self, and then we'll go to Nick.
Sure. I would like to follow up on the comment that Liz made about the current state. And I think that it's pretty safe to say that the current model of company-community relations is broke. It doesn't work. And we see a widening gap between what is expected by communities and society at large, on the other side, what companies are able to deliver. So that gap is widening, right? And what's interesting is that there are very few, there's no company, and there are actually very few projects that are able to demonstrate that they leave communities better off as a result of their presence, which is obviously something that's a bit upsetting. There may be projects that can do it, and that actually have done it, but projects that can actually demonstrate it are very few. So I have two questions, since Peter also took 2 or 3 questions. I thought I throw in 2. One is, how bad does it need to get before companies say, this is not about evolution, this is about something bigger? We need to fundamentally change the model based on which we do business. The second piece goes back to the point about the presentation about FPIC, and that is, as long as there is no clarity about what is actually expected from companies and how much is enough, there will be the good companies that are basically saying, we take a moral high ground and we do it because that's who we are, that's our values. But there will still be a lot of other companies that are in competition with the good companies that still say, because there is no clarity about what's expected, we don't do anything. And they get away with it. And that is really unfair, and that is not a competitive advantage. That could become a competitive advantage in terms of operating in poorly governed countries. So the second question is, what is the process and who leads it in terms of defining what is expected from companies with regards to FPIC?
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Luke. Again, big poignant questions that we've got coming in there. Nick, let's come to yourself next, and then we'll go to John.
I think the interesting challenge that is on the immediate horizon in Peru could be a flag-bearing wake-up call to major mining corporations who have large projects there. All of them are there: BHP, Newmont, Freeport, Anglo American. And if the Castillo presidency goes ahead on 6th of June, he is going to call them to renegotiate their taxation levels. It won't go that way, but he's talking about an 80-20 share, the wrong way round for mining corporations, that they will receive 20 and the state will receive 80. So that, given the social conflict potential in Peru that we all know, could mean that there are serious pressures brought to bear on some of the largest projects on earth. And that could also be an opportunity to have this conversation about how mining corporations cannot leave the province of Cajamarca with poverty rates at X after 20 years of Yanacocha. And I think that's going to be hopefully an opportunity at a global level, but it's going to be a very difficult conversation at the national level, and that these corporations are going to have to face if, as the polls show, Castillo wins, and there are many variables in all of this, and we're doing a report on it, the new president goes ahead with some of his campaign statements. But change is coming in that major mining jurisdiction. Hopefully it's an opportunity. How can we make it be one for the social performance practitioners? Because it could be quite a cold bath.
Great, thanks for that, Nick. John, how about yourself? And then we will go to the lovely Catherine.
Sure, thanks. Well, funnily enough, Nick, my unanswered question, I suppose, is picks up on what Nick has just said. My question would be: is it time to reconsider nationalisation of the mining industries? I think that obviously there's a lot of hurdles to get through from a industry perspective, but it could answer quite a few of the challenges that we face today. I think that there may be greater accountability with that model. I think it would encourage mining to meet needs, be they demands for critical raw materials that are feeding directly into downstream industries, or for societal development. They can use mining as the principal. That can be the principal objective of mining, rather than deriving profits for shareholders. I think if you took that out of the equation, you might end up with a more transparent, generally more acceptable industry. So it would leave a lot of people, as Nick said, feeling cold. But I think it's a discussion worth having, renationalising mining.
Excellent. So we've had why gold, we've got the nationalisation of mining. This is brilliant. Catherine, over to yourself, and then we'll go to Maria.
Okay, so mine is: does social performance need professionalising or accrediting in the same way that geology and environmental practitioners are, to be acknowledged as competent or qualified people in terms of resources reporting and other types of reporting? And that were to happen, would that not then be an increased incentive for all of the universities, apart from Colorado, who are obviously enlightened, to actually incorporate social science as part of their geoscience training and education?
Great, thanks for that, Catherine. And the lovely Maria, who's been sparking all sorts of debate. How about yourself?
Hello, I would like to say that yes, the goals are for every individual and for all of us, but I think that currently it is up to the governments and the leaders and the industries that work in the extraction of resources take the lead in educating, in promoting, in sharing their knowledge about how to boost sustainability in everything we do. Because it is not only a noble purpose, but a necessary and an urgent purpose we need to advance. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maria. So Janice, look at what you just sparked there in terms of one of your many questions that you've been brilliant in posting during today. What are the questions we aren't asking? So just to round things off, Rich, I'm going to come back to yourself for any words in closing.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll put my investor hat on, or my credit committee hat on, perhaps, and answer some of those questions that were raised from, my perspective. It's not everyone's view. Ben, where's Ben gone? He's moved left. Why are we mining so much gold? Yes, it is the Swiss vaults. It's the a lot of people are escaping fiat currency. There are numerous family offices all over the world that want physical gold. They don't trust the greenback. They don't trust sterling. They don't trust yen. Everyone's going back to almost a personal gold standard. We're seeing that a lot. We had an offer for we're looking at $100 million financing, and one family office just offered us 35 million just as an offtake, just to get their hands on the physical. So I'm afraid that's where that's all going. Danny, how do we move this forward as a group? I think the ability for investors at whatever level to just veto the investments. If the companies aren't towing the line and doing it properly, and I don't mean lip service, the investor community now has the capability, and with social media and all the rest of it, can come down on, whether it's Rio Tinto going through an Aussie Aboriginal cave system, or it's the smallest exploration project ripping up, someone's orange, small orange trees or whatever, and not compensating them. Social media gets out there pretty damn quickly. We know about it almost before they do. So there is a veto ability, I guess. I'm afraid, John, I don't really agree with the nationalisation. I'm afraid. I think international companies are held to account. Governments generally aren't. I think we might be in a bigger world of pain than we first thought if we ended up nationalising everything. I do see your point. But it would kind of mess up my investor setup. So I'm not too sure I'm a big fan of that.
Mine too.
Laurie, where's Laurie gone? Some companies have, I'm FCA regulated, or my company is FCA regulated, and there is always the whistleblowing capability within the regulatory environment. Companies now employ that. And there is the confidential side. And there's one thing Sarah and I were working on together, and one of the biggest issues, it was an underground mine, and it was the mental health. I mean, who would have known? And that became it wasn't solving the mining issues or the geology or the, analyzing the risk, but the mental health side. And I learned so much in analyzing that risk and working through it. And suddenly, after that, it didn't become the big boohoo, the male-dominated underground mining environment. And it's the same. Joe Marler came out with it today. He said the Lions tour need. I had to bring it back to rugby. Sorry, Sarah. The Lions tour need a psychiatrist with them. And it's the same sort of thing. So the whistleblowing or the ability to speak to people is very important. And I think Luke and also Catherine and to everybody, I know there are changes afoot, but one way we can get all this solved. And Sarah reminded me that the JORC committee and the 43101 guys and girls are bringing in You will not have a proven reserve unless you prove that your ESG and your social license to operate and all the rest of it is all above board. I think that possibly sums it up, Sarah. All industries can drive it. The investment community, the PE funds and the banks can do it as well. And their credit committees just aren't allowing stuff through that hasn't got this absolutely wrapped up with bows around it. So it is happening, it is working, but it is gradual, I'm afraid. We're a behemoth of an industry.
Fantastic. Rich, I think that was absolutely fabulous, the fact that you attempted to just answer all of those questions that were posed. That is absolutely brilliant. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our fantastic panel and say a massive thank you to all of you. Absolutely brilliant. Just before everybody dials off for the end of today, so that draws us to a conclusion for the third session. We've got another 5 sessions still to go, all of which, and just think about all of those different tools and techniques we've already shared over the last couple of days. It's quite phenomenal. So the resource that we're putting together here should hopefully be really exciting, because we're pulling together all the different tools and techniques for addressing all different angles of ESG within raw materials, pulling them all together and saying, right, okay, so when someone says, does anybody have a tool that can do this, or does anybody have a case study that does that, I've lost the ability to speak English, my sincere apologies. If anybody has that, then that's what we are creating here today. And a massive heartfelt thanks to absolutely everybody, both speakers but also attendees, for all of your insight and everything that you're sharing. So massive thank you to all of you. Just in terms of tomorrow, so the next session, so session number 4, starts at 8 a.m. UK time. So apologies to all of those of you in the Americas. You can either stay up, okay, or get up really early, or just watch the recording as a hint, perhaps. Okay, so this is something which, again, we're being nice to the Australians and everybody in that particular time zone for the next session. We are joined by some of our wonderful Australians, such as Geraldine Maguire, who we first met actually earlier on in January, when she helped us with our resource and reserve roundtable. So if anybody's interested in hearing what is going on in terms of the updating to the resource reserves, all of the ROC reporting codes, there's a roundtable that a bunch of us were involved in earlier on in the year. And there's some summaries of that. So Geraldine will kick things off tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. There's a whole range of different fantastic talks, and all of it is actually going to be hosted by Åsa Borsen tomorrow. So a professional interviewer, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, she's giving me a break, but also you a break from me. This is a good thing, because Åsa is truly awesome. Okay, so that's how you remember how to say her name, because she's just truly brilliant. I'm also going to be giving a talk, so you'll have heard many people mention things about risk management and this thing called Satala. So that's what I do in the other bit of my life. So I will be giving a little 10-minute spiel as to what does risk management within this space really mean, and how can that help things. But the really exciting bit of tomorrow is a panel session which is called Bursting the Bubble. Okay, and for this, we have invited a number of willing participants. They are willing, okay, we haven't forced them into this. These are people who do not work in the raw materials space, okay. I am pretty confident that every single one of them has things like a mobile phone, a computer, etc., and make use of some of the raw materials that are produced in this sector, but none of them are experts with regards to ESG. None of them work in the mining sector. And what Åsa is going to do is ask them a range of questions to ask them what their perspectives are on things like mining, responsible sourcing, etc. Because let's face it, whilst we all know that we work in a really exciting space, they're the majority. And so therefore, we need to understand what the world looks like from all of those different perspectives. So hence the bursting of this raw materials bubble. That's where the name comes from. And so you're going to meet some absolutely fantastic individuals who will have brilliant perspectives, and they're going to share them with us tomorrow. They do know the questions that they're going to be asked, but other than that, we're going to have to just look after them very carefully, because that's quite intimidating, the space that we're inviting them to take part in. Final things to mention. So all of these talks are, of course, going up on the website, and the team behind the scenes is doing an amazing job at almost keeping up with what's going on live. Pretty much, Rose is looking at me thinking, yeah, her computer may well die. But the team behind the scenes is doing an amazing job. I'm looking at Ellen as well. I think we've still got some free spaces going on those training courses, but they are going fast. So if anybody is interested in a free spot on a training course that would usually be worth a significant sum of money. So thank you very much to all of our sponsors. Please do feel free to get in touch with Ellen. And then finally, the competition this week. Please send in to us those pictures of what you think a responsible mine looks like. We don't necessarily mean photographs, but we do mean drawings. So what does that concept look like in your mind? And you don't even need to draw a mine. Draw something else that personifies what that looks like. All entries are, of course, welcome. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, a final massive round of applause to our beautiful and wonderful team of speakers for this afternoon session. Absolutely brilliant. And hopefully see you all tomorrow, either in the morning at 8 a.m. or in the afternoon for session number 5, which will start at the same time. So 3 o'clock in the afternoon UK time, a little bit early in terms of Vancouver, but there's always coffee. It's always fantastic. So brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.